Hello there, people, and welcome back to another episode of Flight Chat. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Another listener feedback episode. It was a little bit of an extra week because some scheduling stuff went down. I actually had to work overtime at my job. The day after, like a day or two after seeing Captain America Brave New World, so hasn't been too long since we recorded, but definitely it's been an extra week since a feedback session, and we've got quite a few emails to dive into, so without further ado, let's jump right in and begin with a couple of emails from John, our good buddy John, who usually leads things off for us here on Flight Chat. This first one is he's sharing his thoughts on the Fantastic Four First Steps trailer, which I don't know that I fully talked about that. I think I mentioned it a little bit in the past, but John's thoughts on it says, it looked good, he says, reminded me of both Incredibles, where fans agree are the best Fantastic Four films we ever got. Yeah, a lot of people, like, I'm not one that says that because it's not Fantastic Four, it's The Incredibles, but yeah, I'm a stickler for, technicalities in that regard. But people want to say that, listen, that's their business. But either way, John says, I don't think we've ever had a good Fantastic Four movie. I will also respectfully disagree with that. But I think the Corman film, he says, and the first story film had some entertainment value in them. It really didn't need too much to be the best Fantastic Four film. This is going back to the First Steps trailer, he says. Galactus should be interesting. If this ends up being a great Fantastic Four movie, that would make me happy, he says. With the poor track record these films have had in the era of the MCU where it's like Star Trek, where now only every other movie is okay to good, it's pretty impressive rather, if this ends up being a hit with the critics and average filmgoer. I'm not entirely sold on Pedro Pascal as Reed, but I'll be fair, and I am thinking these four being in another universe will play into the next Avengers movie. Okay, well, few things with respect to that. One, are we applying the Star Trek rule to the MCU now? Is that really a thing where, and look, as far as the Star Trek rule goes, I've never bought into that, truthfully. I mean, there was a time many, many years ago where I did, and for people who don't know what the Star Trek rule is, it's basically the idea that the odd-numbered Trek movies are bad and the even-numbered Trek movies are good. And this is really only because of Wrath of Khan happening to be the second movie, Voyage Home happening to be the fourth movie, and The Undiscovered Country happening to be the sixth movie, and then Star Trek First Contact, the second TNG movie, the one with the Borg, that's the eighth movie. That's really the only reason that even number rule even exists, because Star Trek Nemesis is the 10th movie, and I know a lot of Trekkies, a lot of Star Trek fans that don't care for that film, so that pretty much bucks the trend with respect to that. And then I know people are 50-50, at least among the fandom, about Star Trek Into Darkness, which is technically the 12th of the Star Trek films, like if we go into the Kelvin timeline. So yeah, I don't think that rule really is as strict with respect to the numbers. And on top of that, I've seen way more people, thankfully, fortunately, come to my side with respect to Star Trek 3 in that it is an underrated Trek movie. I've seen more and more people appreciate that film for what it is, as far as being an awesome friendship film. Everybody, basically throwing things on the line to bring Spock back. And even some people that feel differently about the motion picture, especially since they released the director's edition a couple of years back. So that's 1 and 3. 5, yeah, okay, 5's iffy. I mean, I have softened a lot in terms of like my thoughts on 5, like in the last couple of years, truthfully, but yeah, not the best. Generations, better than people think. And I've seen some people say better than people think. And I've always thought Insurrection was the, just a 2-hour long episode of TNG, which isn't a problem. I don't see an issue with that. It's a TNG movie. And then Star Trek 2009 was really good, and Beyond, I think, is the best of the Kelvin timeline. So that rule doesn't necessarily work with respect to Star Trek logic, in my humble subjective opinion, John. And as far as the MCU is concerned, I mean, we're 35 movies in, or we're really at that point where it's like every other movie is good. No, what it really is, I think perception-wise, is unless it's a massive team-up, all of a sudden there has to be like questions with respect to it, right? Like we were good with Spider-Man No Way Home, we were good with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and we're good with Deadpool and Wolverine, but outside of that, oh no, we're not sure about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, we're not sure about the Marvels, we're not sure about, Captain America Brave New World. Yeah, I don't know about that. I really don't buy into that logic whatsoever. I think it's very wishy-washy in that regard, and I'm not willing to place the even odd number logic on the MCU at this point, or really ever, to be honestly, subjectively speaking. That being said, with respect to your thoughts about the poor track record of the Fantastic Four, the first Tim Story film is, I think, legitimately good. It's not perfect, it has its issues, and it's definitely emblematic of the mid 2000s comic book film, but it's still solid. I think it really is still a solid film. Rise of the Silver Surfer, okay, iffy, not the best of sequels. I don't entirely like necessarily what, even though I dug Lawrence Fishburne being the voice of Silver Surfer, the whole thing. That was back when they kind of weren't giving Doug Jones the ability to like do his own voice, and he would just do a lot of like motion acting. That's changed now, obviously, thanks to, in no large part to Star Trek Discovery and the 5 brilliant seasons there that he turned in as Saru. Doug Jones is awesome, so that's changed in that regard, But yeah, okay, so it's not the best sequel. And Fan Four Stick, there's a whole lot about that movie I don't even remember. I don't even know that I've fully seen it all the way through. So yeah, all right. If you want to call it a poor track record with respect to that, fine. But with respect to how this film is going to go, I agree that it should be interesting, especially since they're going with this retro classic route with Galactus, and we'll see. And clearly they're setting up the whole multiverse idea, and they are going to play a part in whatever it is that they do with respect to the future of the multiverse in the MCU. We'll see how that goes. I didn't have any issues with the trailer, even with that whole like orchestral choir like literally singing the words Fantastic Four at the end of it. I thought it was solid. I thought it was decent. And Pedro Pascal is Pedro Pascal. He's cool. And Vanessa Kirby's cool too. So I think that I think they'll be fine. It looks like a solid trailer, and it's probably going to be a solid movie, I would say, come this July. All right, so that was John's first email. His second email, this is an interesting title. He says, I'm going on a mute/block killing spree. Here's why. Oh, all right. He says, okay, I get Jurassic World 4 is going to cut into Superman's box office. Are we calling it that? I guess it is. Yeah, it is technically Jurassic World 4, yes. But what's its release date? Hang on. Before we go any further, I haven't even paid attention to what the release date on this is. I learned how to type, Ray. Come on. Jurassic. Wow. Why can I not type worth a damn right now? Okay. Jurassic World Rebirth. Okay. Release date July. Oh. Okay. July 2nd. So that's what? 9 days before the release date of Superman. Okay. All right. Fair enough. So he says, I get Jurassic World 4 is going to cut into Superman's box office, but I am seriously starting to mute and block any references to Jurassic World 4, Superman, and Fantastic Four First Steps discourse in any of my social media feeds. I guess film tribalism in general can be just as bad as Marvel versus DC tribalism, maybe even worse because people are using the Jurassic Park franchise and the MCU as a weapon against Superman and the DCU. Emphasizing how much of a beating that film is going to take with those two movies, I had zero interest in seeing Jurassic World 4 in theaters, and this is making me less likely to see it unless Tammy wants to see it. John says, if Fantastic Four First Steps came out 1 week after Superman, then yeah, it would get cannibalized. But people are pretending 2 weeks isn't enough time for Superman to make money when most franchise tentpoles make most of their money within 2 weeks. When people were ridiculing BVS with that 69% drop, it had already surpassed Man of Steel's entire box office run. Do you think Superman will be fine for 2 weeks before Fantastic Four takes his spot? To directly answer your question, John, yes, I do think it'll be fine. But let's go a little bit further here. You need to clean up your social media feeds. I mean that seriously. Since I have ditched Twitter and Threads and have been primarily, in fact, almost entirely on BLUESKY, I've seen none of this. And you know what? I haven't even seen this on Reddit. I think I've mentioned this in passing here and there that I have been dabbling in Reddit in a couple of different groups. One of them being a Superman Reddit. I'm in a Superman Reddit. I'm also in a Snyder Cut Reddit, which, boy, there's some interesting characters, as you can imagine. In that particular Reddit, I'm in the DC Cinematic Reddit. I'm in a Star Trek Reddit. I've already gotten, like, some posts deleted and whatever because people are bitches with respect to stuff. But it is what it is. My point is, I have not seen this. I have no idea. People that are weaponizing Jurassic World Rebirth and Fantastic Four First Steps against Superman, no, you need to clean up your social media feed, John. Seriously. Your social media feed You are following people, you're paying attention to people that you shouldn't be. And I know there was that one email that, you didn't necessarily send for consumption. You were talking about John Campia's mom passing, which, yes, of course, may she rest in peace. Of course, we do have respect for the dead in that regard, even though I still think John Campia is a horrible person in that regard. But if you're still following those types of people, John, maybe that's where you're getting this stuff from. Because I have not seen that. I've seen way more vitriol about the MCU than I have about anything with respect to, oh, it's going to destroy Superman, or Jurassic World Rebirth is going to destroy Superman. So I don't know where you're seeing that from, John, but you need to get away from wherever you're seeing that. Seriously. I'm not saying it's not there, but Twitter is hell in a handbasket full of Nazis at this point. And as far as Facebook, I mean, Facebook has always been full of like deplorable people and ridiculous shit with respect to that. I'm barely on it, and quite honestly, if I do get more active on Facebook again, I'm going to end up paring down a lot of people that I know in, like, personally, that I know in real life, because it's just I'm unwilling to deal with that level of idiocy and ignorance with respect to that social media platform. And I don't know about Threads. I mean, maybe you're seeing all this on Threads. Maybe that's another reason why I'm glad I ditched Threads, because no, that's silly. The thing about Jurassic World Rebirth, I mean, here, let's go ahead and bring up the Jurassic World franchise numbers for a second here. So this is courtesy of Wikipedia looking at the numbers. I mean, yeah, the Jurassic World movies, they're billion-dollar earners, right? The first one was 1.6, the first Jurassic World movie, 1.67 billion worldwide. Fallen Kingdom did 1.3 billion worldwide. Dominion did a flat billion worldwide. So what's the contention here? That, oh, it's going to release 9 days sooner, and that's going to cut into Superman? I mean, why? If anything, Superman will be cutting the legs out from under Jurassic World Rebirth in that regard, right? And what, are we acting like the Jurassic World franchise is on the same level of like generational popularity with respect to the MCU, or with respect to Marvel or DC in that regard? I don't know. I'm not sure. A lot of this is going to come down to marketing. And, if those trolls are saying, oh, well, Jurassic Park markets itself. Well, no, you still have to put out trailers. You still have to do your marketing pushes and your marketing. You still have to spend money on the marketing budget, right? Remember how important the marketing budgets are in that regard? But all right, so it comes out on the 2nd. And then 9 days later, Superman comes out. And then 2 weeks after that, Fantastic Four First Steps comes out. Okay. I mean, to me, I've always looked at this as kind of a reversal of 2017. Justice League disaster aside, in terms of what happened with that movie, remember that movie came out 2 weeks after Thor Ragnarok, and Thor Ragnarok did just fine. And people can point to that and say, well, look at how how deplorable and disliked the DCEU was at that point. No, actually, they were riding some higher momentum after Wonder Woman's success earlier that summer, and it didn't parlay into massive success with the Justice League in this regard, because of what they did to the movie, and the budget ballooning over $300 million and the word of mouth, and it just did not get good legs in that regard. But it had good momentum to build up into, right? So if we're talking about a situation where like Superman is going to get its legs swept out from under it by Fantastic Four, well, then that suggests that we are riding this incredible wave of momentum off of Brave New World into Thunderbolts. Really? Is that what we're thinking? No, I wouldn't say that whatsoever. I don't think it's going to be like that at all. I think the fans, generally speaking, are going to see both films, and the general audience will determine for you whether or not they want to see both films. I don't know. I know that marketing is important with respect to a new Superman film, with respect to, DCU and DC Studios really breaking out here. So that's going to be a big part of it. But no, I don't think that the 2 weeks, I think 2 weeks is more than enough time. Seriously, it is more than enough time for it to survive. And we've seen plenty of precedent for this. Okay, Barbenheimer, that's the phenomenon that was. It made Barbie $1 billion, it made Oppenheimer over $900 million. Both Universal and Warner Brothers were very happy with that result, okay? And we've seen other films do well coming out within a week or two of each other. So no, I don't buy into the bullshit, any of the trolling from anyone on social media. But I'm going to tell you that you probably shouldn't go on a mute blocking spree. You should rethink your social media entirely because you're following the wrong people. You're paying attention to the wrong people in that regard. As far as your own peace of mind is concerned, right? If that's not a big deal, which it sounds like it is a big deal because you want to go on a mute blocking spree, which I used to do back in the day, but that was because I was on Twitter. And then after that, I was on Threads. Threads wasn't as bad as Twitter used to be, or as bad as Twitter is now, but still, I'm on neither one of those, and it's just far more peaceful, man. So that's what I'm going to recommend to you. I mean, if I'm on Reddit and Reddit isn't as bad as what you're talking about, if I still haven't seen this type of sentiment on Reddit, then you know what? Fix your social media. You have the power, you have the control. Stop following the wrong people and start following better people, more rational people in that regard. That's my biggest recommendation to you, good sir. But he says he also has one more question, and he asks, so you know how people complain about diversity in media? Okay. Maybe instead of demanding something to replace it, why not demand another type of material so they can watch white guys named Chris in their parents' basement? Or create fan fiction. This is what I don't understand about fandom. There was a show on Nickelodeon, he says, called Rocket Power. The four friends, Otto, his sister Reggie, Twister, and Sam, Squid, walked out of a theater and trashed the movie, saying a monkey can make a better movie. Then one of them says, so why don't we? Seriously, instead of bitching about Gina Carano getting fired, make a Star Wars fan fiction, or to any bigots complaining about the casting in other shows like Star Trek, make your own damn show, seriously. I think online fandom would be less xenophobic and racist if these toxic alt-right fans took a page from Bender. I'll just start my own thing with blackjack and hookers. Why don't they just do that instead of create more online outrage? Okay, well, here's why they won't do that, John. It's because when they do make their own stuff, like Gina Carano has, Gina Carano starred about a year or so ago in an action movie about the evils of Hunter Biden's laptop. You know why you've never heard of it? Because nobody gave a shit. It was put on by a studio that nobody paid attention to. The trailer didn't get a whole lot of buzz. It wasn't played on any of the major networks, right? Because they didn't have the budget or the money for it. They didn't have the financial backing for that, right? And that's what it's about. That's why, like, alt-righters and, conservatives have hated Hollywood because, like, they're the ones, like, the studios run everything as far as, like, marketing, as far as production, as far as, getting in all the good talk shows and all the good press tours and everything like that. They know that the only way to get what they want out there to the masses is through Hollywood. It's begrudging. They don't want to have to admit that, but it's the same reason why when Trump got reelected, what was that one move where he appointed like Mel Gibson and like Steven Seagal and a couple of others to be like his ambassadors to Hollywood, which was just one of the absolute dumbest things, among all of the other incredible stupidity that is befalling our country right now. I digress. But the reason is because they know that Hollywood is their only way through, because nobody else pays attention to their shit otherwise. And that's why they're loud about it. They want the online outrage because they want people to, like, attack Hollywood. They want people to besiege Hollywood. When the reality of the situation, the majority of the general audience doesn't give a shit with respect to white man outrage in Hollywood, or they're on the other end of it and they're like, no, I would prefer to see myself because, a good portion of this country, a good portion of this planet is brown. And we like seeing ourselves represented in films. Why do you think not the Fantastic Four, but the Fast and Furious movies, why do you think those movies do well? Do you think it's because of Paul Walker, may he rest in peace? No. You think it's just because Vin Diesel is there, but you've also got Michelle Rodriguez, you have Jordana Brewster, you have flippin' Ludacris and Tyrese. And seriously, the Fantastic, I keep saying Fantastic, no, the Fast and Furious franchise. The Fast and Furious franchise is one of the most culturally diverse film franchises out there. That's why there are 9. That's a big reason why there are 10 of those movies, not 9. I haven't seen the 10th one. That's why there's 10 of those movies, and that's why they've continued. And Sung Kang, dude that plays Han, right? And yeah, you've got Jason Statham in there for good measure, but you threw The Rock in there, right? Like, diversity sells. And that's what they hate, John. That's what the white alt-righters and the racist guys hate. They hate the fact that diversity sells, and they wish it didn't, but they don't have any recourse. They've made plenty of their own stuff, funded by Breitbart and the Oath Keepers and all this other shit. It doesn't sell. The closest you could get, and this is, a controversial somewhat, but the closest you could get is that Sound of Freedom movie, right? The one movie starring Jim Caviezel that Mel Gibson produced, which is, about guys going after sex trafficking organization. I have not seen this movie, but I know that turned into like a rallying cry, right? It was produced and distributed by Angel Studios, an independent media company that's based out of Provo, Utah, on a $14.5 million budget. $250.6 million is what it made at the box office, and it was being touted as a MAGA film in that regard, right? But here's the thing: I look at this cast, and I have not seen this movie, but I look at this cast, and I see a whole lot of brown people or people that are not white that are in this cast, right? Eduardo Verastegui, or Javier Godino, Jose Zuniga, like a Honduran American, right? Like, so as much as a movie like this, especially with, I hear it also has like Christian undertones and stuff like that. As much as a movie like this, like, it wants to be touted as, oh well, here's an example of, good wholesome white man filmmaking or whatever. No, not even that. Like, diversity is necessary for ultimate success, even in a film like this. In this regard, you know what I mean? So like that's the thing. They get loud about it on social media. They get loud about it online because they have no other recourse. If they don't involve some form of diversity in their projects, then they don't sell, right? Whether they're independently made or whether they go through the Hollywood system, because the smart business people know that diversity sells. They know that inclusivity sells in that regard. So the complaints are because they want to try and flip the script on that, and they want to try and enrage enough people to get them on their side, but it's not working. At least not with respect to that. It certainly is not working. And I know there are people that would argue that it is working because of all these studios like Disney that have rolled back DEI initiatives, but the reality of the situation is, when it comes to that box office, when it comes to the bottom line, the bank accounts, if you will, of these executives, that's what matters the most by far. Okay, that's where it comes down to. And regardless of what is done, like in terms of like for PR purposes, like, hey, we're rolling back on this, we're rolling back on that, the studios and the executives, they know where their bread is buttered. The same with these sports leagues, right? The NFL rolls back DEI. Does that mean that they're all of a sudden not going to have black players? Of course not. Of course, they're still going to have black players, because there'd be no league without black players. I mean, literally, the vast majority of the league would not exist in that regard, right? Because diversity is important. Diversity, equality, and inclusion is important for good business, because good business people know not to turn away money. They know that they want everyone's money, right? They literally only care about the color green in that regard, and they want it out of everybody's wallet, regardless of whether they're white or whether they're male in that regard, that type of deal. So that's what it is they create their own stuff. Nobody sees it. They don't get the same push. They don't get the same publicity. They certainly don't get the same money. So their only recourse is online outrage to try and change Hollywood in that respective. And it's not going to work the way that they want it to. It just isn't. They're going to try, but that's where the attack comes from. That's why they're creating the outrage, because they need Disney, they need Warner Brothers, they need Universal, they need the bigger studios in Hollywood to do what they say in order for them to get what they want, because they can't do it themselves. They simply cannot do it themselves in that regard. So that's the best answer I can give you with respect to that question. All right. Third email from Mr. John here. He says, my girlfriend Tammy is a Disney fan and has had more exposure to Marvel than DC. She's pretty general audience when it comes to DC as it gets. She watched Man of Steel with me, he says, and thought it was great. Her words, quote, movies often show that not all problems need or have solving, like Superman's choice to stand with humanity and Zod's fight for his own people, highlighting how everyone ultimately looks out for themselves, end quote. John says it really does show that the Snyder hate can be manufactured or enabled by the people in someone's circle. Tammy doesn't have friends who talk about DC like that and therefore didn't have preconceived notions. I think Shonda was that way too, if I'm not mistaken. Well, yes, but again, she enjoyed Man of Steel well before there was any like hatred or vitriol for it. She enjoyed it from the moment she watched it on July 14th, 2013 in that regard. Her thought was that she felt it was better than the Reeve movies because she didn't grow up on those movies, didn't have the same nostalgia for them in that regard. So, I mean, that was part of it. But John says Brad Jones, aka the Cinema Snob, admitted he saw Man of Steel as a film first and not as a Superman movie and still hated it. But his friends are Superman fans and hated it, making me think the people he hangs with influence his opinions. Plus, Lindsay, quote, I have it on good authority that Snyder hates his mom, Ellis, oh yeah, her, who now has a New York Times bestseller. Yeah, well, a lot of dumb people have New York Times bestsellers. It doesn't mean anything. Called Man of Steel, he says, arbitrarily the worst film of 2013, but admits she has a bias for Marvel and never got into DC outside of Batman occasionally. She's friends with Linkara and other former channel Awesome alumni who also trash the Snyderverse, more so Man of Steel and BVS than Zack Snyder's Justice League, so it's clear that she naturally exhibits that mentality, John says. Meanwhile, Tammy is pretty general audience as it gets. She doesn't inhabit social media like that, nor does she doesn't have friends who gatekeep their opinions. A little bit of grammar syntax on that one, John. I think she has a wider strike zone than me too, he says, so she is far more lenient on films than I am, maybe as much as you. I added to her comments, he says, that it's kind of like natural selection, but perhaps a more appropriate anecdote would be nature versus nurture. I think who we surround ourselves with and how we were raised shape who we are. Do you think there's some truth to that, and what do you think of my perspective on Tammy's view on Man of Steel? Absolutely. No, there's a group thing, no doubt about it. And this is why I reinforce to fans the difference between the general audience and the fans and the disparity in terms of the numbers, right? And this goes to highlight the absolute idiocy and ignorance of Warner Brothers back in 2016 and 2017, when they chose to listen to the 5 to 10% of dumbass fans that were just so angry. Fans and comic creators and bloggers and critics, they were so pissed off about what BVS did. Oh my goodness, it's a travesty, it's this, it's that, or whatever. You listen to them instead of listening to the general audience that spent $873.6 million on that movie after spending $668 million on Man of Steel. Instead of following the progression of money in the box office and the general audience telling you, hey, we spent $1.5 billion on this, let's see where you go with it. And then on top of that, spent a further $745.6 million on a Suicide Squad movie that got mangled by a trailer company and 6 weeks of dumbass reshoots for humor, and then also spent $821 plus million on a Wonder Woman film that, by the way, since we were talking about legs earlier, John, remember Wonder Woman managed to fend off a Transformers film and Spider-Man Homecoming and still maintained its box office. This was several weeks after its release at the beginning of June of 2017, right? The first 4 films of the DCEU made $3 billion combined. And instead of following the money, and instead of following the general audience perspective that, you're right, is insulated from a lot of the dumbasses on social media, they listened to the dumbasses on social media, and that's how Justice League happened. And that's what torpedoed the DCEU. And I see that being argued about on Reddit a lot. That is one thing I've seen. People arguing, who really killed the DCEU? Oh, it wasn't Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder most certainly did not kill the DCEU, and neither did James Gunn, because there are people coming out now saying, oh, it's James Gunn's fault because he could have brought it back, because they still foolishly believe that if The Rock and $7 Production had won out for control of DC Studios, they would be giving us the Snyderverse. No, they would be giving us the $7 Snyderverse, which would have been Superman versus Black Adam 50 times. That's all that would have been. It would not have been anywhere near what we wanted with respect to any type of Restore the Snyderverse campaign in that regard. No, Warner Brothers killed the DCEU because they listened to the wrong people. And whether they admit that or not, because this is how they got all fired. This is how Suchihara, this is how Johns and Berg, this is how Diane Nelson, this is how everybody got fired. They listened to the wrong people, and they spent money and bet on the wrong horse because they foolishly believed that Lindsay Ellis and Brad Jones, the Cinema Snob, and Linkara and Channel Awesome alumni, they foolishly believed that those people are the majority of the audience. They are not, and they never will be. I will find 10 people on the street corner right now that have no idea who Lindsay Ellis is, could not care less who she is, and wouldn't even know what the name of her New York Times bestseller is. Okay? She is a niche individual on social media. She applies to people that inhabit social media on a regular basis. That is not the majority of the general audience. The majority of the general audience has lives, right? Even more so than we do. and they could not give less than two shits about this. They're still waiting. They're still waiting for Spider-Man to show up in a Justice League movie and Aquaman to show up in an Avengers film. They're still waiting for that. This is how they are. This is why I try to highlight the difference between general audience and fans. 90 to 95% of the audience total is the general audience that doesn't give a shit. Rest of us, that 5 to 10%, if we're lucky, are the people who give a shit, the people who know who Lindsay Ellis is, the people who want to do the mass blocking on social media because we hear shit about how Jurassic World is going to shoot the lights out on Superman, or how Fantastic Four First Steps is going to cut it off at the knees, that kind of bullshit. No, we are not the majority. And neither any of these bloggers, critics, and fanboys. We are not the majority. We are the small part that makes the loudest noise. Okay, if we were the majority, John, if we were the majority, then there would be a lot more marketing, or a lot less marketing, rather, because the fact that millions of dollars have to be spent on TV spots and trailers and appearances on talk shows and, press tours, those millions have to be spent for all of the people that don't pay attention to what we pay attention to, like Tammy. Tammy is someone that doesn't pay attention to that stuff in that regard, right? So yeah, absolutely, the preconceived notions and the hatred and all that, yes, that absolutely is part of the circle that you are a part of. Because I guarantee you, even if I go and find someone in the general audience that didn't like BVS, like say they have no idea who any of the people that we know are, and they didn't like BVS, they're going to say, I didn't really care for it, and they're going to move on. They're not going to be like, it was the worst thing I've ever seen. I can't believe this. It's such a travesty. It's destroyed Superman, and Zack Snyder is the Antichrist. No, they don't think about it that seriously, because it's not that big of a deal to them. It's not that big of a deal to the general audience, because in their circles, in the general audience circles, it's all movies anyway, and it's whatever. It's like, okay, at the end of the day, do I like this movie or not? If I do, great. If not, whatever. I will move on to the next thing to see if I like that. And that's how they're going to treat, James Gunn's Superman film. They'll try it, and if they like it, they'll continue on. If not, they'll move on to the next thing. That's just how it works in that regard. But absolutely, yes, there's definitely truth to the idea of our opinions and our groupthink being shaped by who we are like covert with and who are in our circles. Absolutely, no doubt about it. I know there are people out there. Brent, my podcast brother, my former podcast brother from Squadcast Media. I've never talked with him about this, but I will go ahead and say this. I firmly believe for the last number of years that his hatred, his strong feelings, maybe it's not hatred, but his strong feelings against the Snyder films, specifically against BVS and specifically against Zack Snyder's Justice League. I strongly believe that a good portion, if not the majority of his strong feelings against those movies has less to do with the movies themselves and more to do with the fandom surrounding it. It's the toxicity that he hates, because he saw all that on Twitter, and he saw them attack the Marvel fans, he saw them attack other, the critics and everything. He saw the toxicity happen, and so in his mind, that's the root of all evil. And I know there are plenty of other fans that feel that way with respect to that. They don't hate those movies nearly as much as they hate the toxicity around them. And the flip side can be said with respect to any fans of Zack Snyder films who hate the Marvel movies because they feel that that fan base has been toxic, which they have, right? And certainly the anti-Snyders and the people, the DC fans that clutch their pearls to Superman, the movie in 1978, and the Christopher Reeve interpretation and all that. Yes, toxicity on their end too. Toxicity begets further toxicity. I feel like there are a lot of fans out there that their anger is more with the toxicity of the fandoms than it is with the actual product, than it is with the actual films. I absolutely 100% believe that. And if it wasn't for the level of toxicity, then they may feel differently. And it's not saying that it's, regardless of whoever's fault it might be, I think that's where a lot of the groupthink comes from, right? If you know somebody that was, trashed by the Snyder cultists, then yeah, you're going to be pissy. You're not going to like it, and you're going to think anything associated with that is not going to be good, especially since Zack Snyder hasn't said anything necessarily to decry them, because he's moved on and, doesn't necessarily do that in that regard, right? Whether he identifies with them or not, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that he does not identify with them. But regardless, it doesn't matter. It's like, well, that's how you feel, right? And it's the same if you got trashed by somebody who told you were wrong for liking BVS or Zack Snyder's Justice League, then that's going to stick in your mind and you're going to always feel a certain way about those people and you're going to group them into that groupthink in that regard. And right or wrong, that's how people's emotions work. And so, yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with you. You know, the general audience doesn't feel the same way about this as we do, and Tammy certainly sounds like part of that. No doubt about it in that regard. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one for sure, my good friend. All right, how about your last email here for consumption on this show called The Existentialism of Opinions? By the way, I should say we're treading into Anthony Dorsey territory with respect to this, but at least in your case, John, it's 4 emails and not one. I'll say that with that regard. By the way, nothing from Anthony this week, just as a look ahead. But this is a longer email called The Existentialism of Opinions from John. He says, Part 1. I want to share this quote I shared on Facebook in regards to Captain America Brave New World getting a B- cinema score. Quote, I've inhabited social media fandom for 20 years, ever since I started a MySpace page in 2005 and joined pro wrestling forum sites. During that time, I met some important/cool people, but I've also experienced things that gave me PTSD. This weekend taught me something. There's too many people online. Like the Paul McCartney song, Too Many People. And my first mistake is not realizing that fandom is a small echo chamber minority sooner. But these really are echo chambers and groups that cultivate very vocal opinions on different websites. You have people who love franchises, people who hate franchises, used to love but now hate for reasons, and used to hate but now love for reasons. Intellectual properties have had periods of triumph and periods of failure, all of them at different points. Anime, pro wrestling, DC, Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek, Jurassic Park, James Bond, Harry Potter, Ninja Turtles, Sonic, Mario, Transformers, etc. All of it. And no matter how good or how bad these franchises do, the fact that we still take our time to have discussions about these properties means they stand the test of time. That being said, I don't know when I'll see this movie, but if you enjoy it, go enjoy it. Go enjoy it. Don't let others get you down on the flip side. If you think this cinema score is justified, then don't see it. Just remember, no matter what, do not allow something to seem bigger than it is. Inhabitants of social media don't decide the fate of a movie. It's the ones that don't inhabit it, and no matter how bad or good this does commercially or any film this year does, it's not going to go away. They're trying to make a He-Man movie again in the 2020s. If Marvel lays dormant, if Superman doesn't work and DC goes dormant, they'll all come back eventually. Fads come and go, but if we're giving Smurfs another go in 2025, by the way, my girlfriend loves Smurfs and I hope she has a blast even if I'm not into the franchise, then it doesn't matter. You always have Batman, you will always have Superman, you will always have Spider-Man, you will always have an X-Men, an Optimus Prime, a Mario. As long as Hollywood continues to struggle with original ideas, they will always fall back on these big-name properties. End quote. John says, I still haven't seen it, Brave New World, I think he's talking about, and I will try to see it eventually. The point I'm trying to make with sharing this is, he says, I realize that there are no winners when it comes to tribalism. There's so many different opinions on the DCU online, I can't even keep up. Like someone you know, I won't say who it is, but it rhymes with Myron Fafayette. His sole purpose seems to be to criticize every minor detail over David Cornswett's Superman. Right now, it just seems easier just to not post anything about upcoming movies. I just can't deal with these random strangers anymore. I keep forgetting they aren't the ones who control what happens to Superman. Okay, hang on. Myron Fafayette. Okay. Somebody else listening to that probably gets that immediately. At the moment, I'm not sure who you're talking about, but I'm sure if and when you tell me in another email, John, I'll know exactly. Oh, that person. Yeah. Fair enough. It is what it is. But that's his part 1 of this email, which, by the way, I completely agree with everything he said in part 1. And I feel like I said a lot of it in response to his earlier email about Tammy watching Man of Steel. But here's part 2 of John's last email. He says, but I do have to share a journey of something I was late to the party on. The Beach Boys. Oh, here we go, some music. For the last 4 years, I feel as though I found God learning about the history of this band. Wow, strong statement, John. Let me put this in full context, he says. Growing up, my father played 5 musicians the majority of the time. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, and Harry Chapin. He was also a musician himself and played his own songs as well on our cassette. I went through his other records. I sometimes looked at covers to music albums. I also did this home video releases of movies like it was the equivalent to staring at an art in a museum. But I don't think he owned any Beach Boys, he says. He didn't dislike them. There were some songs of theirs he liked, Surfin' Safari and I Get Around, and I had early memories of I don't think I heard their later work until people started putting Pet Sounds next to Sgt. Pepper, Born in the USA, Highway 61 Revisited, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Thriller. I never listened to the entire album before 2021, but then I saw the biopic, Love and Mercy, named after the Brian Wilson solo song starring the Riddler himself, Paul Dano, as 60s Brian Wilson and John Cusack playing 80s Brian. I've never heard of that movie. Interesting. He says, I think what made me resonate with Brian is he had his own mental health problems as I did. The way he got depressed at the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, Beat Pet Sounds, and not being able to finish his magnum opus Smile was a lot like how I got depressed as to how much people were being harsh towards Snyder. He spent most of his days in the early to mid 70s in bed for a number of years. I think I did as well. So eventually, after seeing the movie, he says, I listened to Pet Sounds and it was a masterpiece. I also listened to some of their other songs too from their early era as well. It wasn't always about surfing. In My Room and Warmth of the Sun stand out as angels singing choirs. For the next several years, I embarked on this journey of so many archived footage of interviews, live performances, documentaries, rewatching their appearances on Full House, made-for-TV movies, plus I discovered Carney Wilson from the pop trio Wilson Phillips was Brian's daughter. And then this past week, I finally got to listen to two different versions of Smile, John says. Once as a Brian Wilson solo album from 2004, and then 2011 saw the closest to an official release of the Beach Boys' version of Smile, the Smile Sessions. It's the best concept album ever made. Surf's Up is the equivalent to the Beatles' A Day in the Life. The recurring themes in each track and the foreshadowing with the harmonies, it's beautiful, Ray and listeners. Technically, there was a version of Smile that got released early on called Smiley Smile, but it's not really that great, he says. Although I wouldn't say Smiley Smiles is on this level, but it's like Justice League, and the original Smile is Zack Snyder's Justice League. Okay. Maybe a better comparison to Smiley Smile is Richard Lester's Superman 2, all while Smile is Richard Donner's. All right. Interesting comparisons you're making there, but I think I get what you're saying. But he asks, what extent of a fan are you? Obviously, some members like Mike Love and Bruce Johnson, you'll have to separate the art from the artist if you know anything about their political ideologies. But Brian and Al Jardine seem apolitical. Unfortunately, Brian's brothers Dennis died in 1983 and Carl died in 1998 aren't around anymore, so I can't say what their politics were. But if you can separate the art, the Beach Boys now have become my third favorite band of all time, and while it might be considered patronizing at this point to call Brian Williams a genius, his music will continue to age like fine wine just as much as any of Lennon, McCartney, or Leiber Stoller will. Seriously, I cannot stress enough how much I missed the boat on this band's discography. There are some stinkers, but I and many others can't give enough praise to them. Also, for some reason, Sail On Sailor sounds like it has Seal's Kiss from a Rose playing in the background. Oh, Tammy and Brian share a June 20th birthday, which I thought was a funny coincidence. So, John, I can't say that I am a massive fan of the Beach Boys like that at all. I got introduced to them through Full House. Their appearances on Full House, because like Jesse was a huge fan of them, right? Like that was my introduction to them, and yeah, I do know a couple of their songs here and there, and the one that you just mentioned, Sail On Sailor, that was in The Departed, which that was the first time I'd ever heard that song. And then also uh, Darlin', which that was an earworm song in a pinnacle episode of The Big Bang Theory in the ninth season when Amy and Sheldon got back together. So I'm familiar with that song and a number of other hits, some of the other ones that you mentioned here. But I wouldn't call myself like a massive fan of the Beach Boys. I hear their music here and there. I've never sat down and like listened to a full album. I don't know. I'm not anti Beach Boys, certainly not, but I would certainly not call myself a massive fan of it. But it definitely sounds like it had a profound influence on you, and that it definitely you found a lot of relatable stuff, which that's all you can ask for. With putting all the separating the art and the artist and all that. When art hits you on the right level, it definitely is a transcendent experience, and it sounds like you most certainly have had one with respect to your discovery of the Beach Boys. So cool. No, that's awesome. Good. I'm glad for you for that particular revelation in your life with respect to the art form. I think that's it from John with respect to the emails for this particular week. So thank you, John, with respect to all of your emails. You sent, like, I think we got through like 4 or 5 of them, to be honest with you. Lots of good stuff to talk about there with respect to fandom and everything. And yeah, we look forward to the rest of the comic book movies. And definitely, dude, fix your social media because, yeah, you're still following too many trolls. I really believe that in that regard. So, yeah, as always, thank you for the kind words and the feedback, good sir. Looking forward to more on our next episode. All right, we have a newcomer to the feedback circle here at Flight Chat. A gentleman by the name of, I really hope I'm pronouncing this right, Amr Zadan, who uh, calls it, he says his name is Amr Osama. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I do. I hope it's either Amr or Amir. I think it's Amr. I'm not, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. I apologize if I am not. But he sent this email in a few weeks ago. He said, "Hey Ray, I hope you're doing well. My name is Amr Osama. I'm a longtime listener of the Flightcast from Egypt, and I've been following you since 2019 or 2020. I've never sent in email for the Flight Chat before, so I figured I'd try my luck now, though I'm not sure if this will reach you in time for the next episode." It most certainly did, my good sir. He said, "I've been listening to your recent podcast, and I've noticed Star Trek has come up quite a few times, with fans sharing their thoughts and experiences. It's always been a universe I wanted to explore but never had the chance, and hearing your discussions finally gave me the push to dive in. After some research, I decided to start with Star Trek The Next Generation, partly because I feared the age of the original series might turn me off, though I do plan to watch it at some point." That is completely understandable, good sir. He says, "As of February 10th, I've watched 4 episodes so far, and I really liked what I saw. I'll definitely keep going. It's most definitely different, at least to me, than any other sci-fi show I've watched. What stands out the most is how character and dialogue driven it is, which is a refreshing change from the more action-heavy sci-fi I'm used to. Beyond Star Trek, I've also been watching your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and so far I'm really enjoying it. It's been a while since I've had that feeling with a Spidey show. The last time was Spectacular Spider-Man and the early seasons of Ultimate Spider-Man. It's great to see Spidey back in action, especially since the animated shows, along with the Raimi films, were how I was introduced to the character and fell in love with him in the first place. I might be a little biased since I tend to enjoy anything Spidey related regardless of what grifters think. The other show I've started is My Adventures with Superman. I'm only 3 episodes in, but surprise, surprise, I like it too. It's been a while since I've watched any Superman related media, and I wanted something to hold me over until James Gunn's Superman releases in theaters this July. If anything, watching the show has only made me more excited for the film. Looking forward to your thoughts, and thanks for all the great content you put out. Best, Amr Osama." Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Amr. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for all of the support. To know that you've been listening for so long and you're now joining the feedback circle. Welcome. Welcome indeed. I have not watched Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man yet. I've heard good things about it. I've not heard bad things about it. A few people have talked about it here as well. But I'm glad it's a good show. My backlog of shows is so long, as I'm sure you've heard. The list grows longer and longer, and I have there's just too much shit to watch. There just is. At some point I may get to it, but I have watched My Adventures with Superman. Scott and I talked about it over on DCTV Squadcast and Squadcast Media some months ago, and really like that show. Really think they did an awesome job, and I'm looking forward to season 3, which I believe they are doing. I believe that is in the works for that show. No, that was really good. My Adventures with Superman was really good, and it is a good tide over, I think, for people impatiently waiting for Superman on July 11th. No doubt about that. But as far as your Star Trek voyage, if you will, I think you included a second email called "Continuing My Star Trek Journey: Early Thoughts on TNG and MCU Excitement." So let's go ahead and dive into Amr's second email with respect to his thoughts on that. As he is now 5 episodes in to Star Trek The Next Generation, he says, "One thing that stood out to me, other than he's so far really, really liking it, he says, one thing that stood out to me is how ahead of its time the show feels, especially for something produced in the late 80s. I was surprised to see the Enterprise using a form of touchscreens rather than the usual analog aesthetic I'm used to seeing in older sci-fi. It's little details like this that make the show's vision of the future feel believable even decades later." No, that's a very good point. The LCAR system and definitely the touchscreen stuff, absolutely, a precursor to how technology actually went and has been going. No doubt about that, Amr. He says, "I also like how, at least so far, each episode is self-contained. It really gives off the vibe of a day in the adventures of Captain Picard and the Enterprise, and I'm curious if the structure changes as the show goes on. Not really. Without giving a whole lot of spoilers, no, it stays pretty much episodic, at least throughout this show, to be honest with you. There are a few plot lines that maybe carry over a little bit, but nothing serialized. It's not really a heavily serialized show at all. Not this one in that regard. Some of the other Star Trek shows most certainly are, but not this one. That really doesn't start until Deep Space Nine, to be honest with you, which is right after this one. Uh, but he says, like I mentioned last time, the show is much more character and dialogue driven than modern sci fi, and I appreciate its slower pacing. The good kind of slow, where the story takes its time yet still keeps you intrigued throughout the episode. I wonder if this has something to do with budget constraints, since it was a 1980s network TV show and they couldn't rely on big spectacle and action, but I don't know if that's actually the case or if Star Trek has always been like this. Either way, I like the approach. It's a little bit of both, Amr, to be honest with you, because they did focus on more story and character driven beats and a different type of pacing for television in general, certainly for shows like this back in the 80s and 90s and certainly in the 60s as well. But there were also budget constraints. There was also only so much that they could do visual effects wise, and they did everything that they could, and push the envelope, I think, further than Star Trek had gone at that point in time. But yeah, it's a little bit of both in that regard, I would say, with respect to the approach that they took with TNG. He says another thing I've been enjoying is how every episode presents a new mystery for the Enterprise to solve. Whether it's an unknown phenomenon, a strange new species, or a diplomatic crisis, it always feels like there's a compelling problem to unravel. It makes each episode feel fresh and keeps me invested in seeing how the crew figures things out. I also really appreciate how diverse the show is, especially when it comes to alien species. I'm always surprised by the new civilizations that the Enterprise encounters. The show has a way of making these species feel lived in and distinct, rather than just coming across as alien species number 237. Every alien culture introduced so far has had its own charm and personality, making the Star Trek universe feel much richer. I do agree. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, honestly, Amber, with respect to the fact that all of these alien races are humanoid, but they're different enough and they emphasize differences in culture and differences in appearance and how they operate enough that there is enough of a richness there that they don't just feel like tacked on or added in. Like there's a backstory and there's development behind these cultures that they introduce, whether it's Klingon, Romulan, Cardassian, Bajoran, Ferengi, whoever it is, right? They do an awesome job of setting the table for how this galaxy operates and how all of these humanoid creatures operate in that regard. And even the ones that aren't necessarily humanoid, definitely they expound upon that as well. So I agree with you on that. He says, last time I forgot to mention that my only experience with Star Trek before this was the 2009 reboot and its sequels. When I started researching more about the franchise, I learned that the reboot takes place in what's called the Kelvin timeline, and that the movies and shows actually coexist in different timelines. In my opinion, that's a great way to reboot a franchise, having a fresh start while still respecting and keeping what came before. Yeah, and that's a case where there were legal reasons behind that. Just to give you a bit of a peek behind the curtain, Amr, that was because at that time CBS, who owned the television rights to Star Trek, was separated from Viacom, Paramount, who owned the movie rights to Star Trek. And so the movie rights were with one studio, the television rights were with another. And so when Paramount wanted to do Star Trek movies again, they couldn't involve anything directly involving the shows because they didn't have the rights to those characters and storylines and whatnot. So they basically made an offshoot. They made a reboot that was different enough. That's basically the Kelvin timeline is a reboot of the original series, right? So I tell you what, if there's anything that you like thematically about those characters in the Kelvin timeline, that is a precursor to how they are in the original series. Now, granted, the budget, very different. Time they were made, very different. But it's still the same characters. And I can tell you as a diehard fan, the spirit of those characters and how they were represented in the Kelvin timeline absolutely matches how they were played in the original show and the subsequent movies that came out of that show. I would say they did a very faithful job with respect to giving them a new spin while also paying great tribute and history to where those characters evolved and how the original actors bore them out and grew them over the course of the 3 seasons of the original series and again into the movies that came out afterwards. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. He says the other reason I chose TNG as my starting point was Patrick Stewart. And in my opinion, Patrick Stewart is always a win. So far, my favorite character has been Data. I was watching Lonely Among Us and I burst out laughing when he suddenly started acting like Sherlock Holmes after Captain Picard mentioned him. That moment completely caught me off guard in the best way. I can't argue with you there. Patrick Stewart is aces, no doubt about it. And Data, yeah, I'm with you. He's probably, without question, my favorite character in TNG and one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise, no doubt about that. He is the Spock of TNG, no doubt about that. And I love Spock. Spock's might be my favorite character in the whole franchise, to be honest with you. He says, outside of Star Trek, I'm also looking forward to what Marvel has coming out this year. Captain America, Brave New World, Thunderbolts, and Fantastic Four all look very promising. He says, I saw the Thunderbolts trailer that was released during the Super Bowl, and one thing that stood out to me was how good visually the movie looks, especially in terms of color grading and cinematography. I'm sure you've heard the constant critique that MCU movies often look dull and gray. I do kind of agree with that sentiment, but there have been plenty of exceptions. From what I've seen in the Thunderbolts trailer, the visuals look very eye-catching, which gives me a lot of hope for how this movie will stand out stylistically. He says the same thing applies to Fantastic Four. I'm really liking the retro-futuristic Art Deco 1960s aesthetic they're going for. It actually reminds me of the Marvels comic, especially with Alex Ross's art style. It's most definitely set in a different universe, and I'm already wondering how other MCU superheroes would look in this world if they even exist at all. It seems like the Fantastic Four might be the only superheroes in town, which is an interesting direction to take, he says. Along with the upcoming movies, I'm also really happy to see Daredevil making his return. Wow, that's coming up soon, by the way. I wouldn't consider Daredevil to be my favorite Marvel character, he says, but the Netflix show completely changed my perspective on him. It took whatever appreciation of the character I had to a whole new level, he says. That being said, I still have a soft spot for Ben Affleck's Daredevil. That movie's vibe is really awesome. It totally feeds my love for that dark, edgy 2000s movie aesthetic. The soundtrack especially adds to that vibe with the early 2000s alternative rock making it feel even more of its time in the best way possible. It may not be the most well-received superhero film, but it has a unique charm that I'll always enjoy. I'm excited to keep watching TNG, and I'll probably send more thoughts as I go along. Thanks again for all the great content you put out. Regards, Amr Osama. Uh, Thank you again for the feedback. Thank you again for joining the feedback circle, Amr. I will say this with respect to your thoughts. First on Star Trek, I will tell you, I look forward to hearing your thoughts as you go through TNG, and I really do hope that you enjoy it. I will give you a bit of a heads up. We do have another listener that is going through the entirety of the show, and he's doing episode breakdowns. That's Alex De Silva, and he's got another one, I suspect, and some emails that he sent recently that we're going to go through in this episode. So you may wish to be a little careful with respect to spoilers and whatnot. I don't know how you feel about that. He doesn't go necessarily like too in depth with it, but he does break down what he saw and his thoughts on certain episodes, and I'll respond to it because obviously I've seen all 178 episodes of that show multiple times and owned them in physical form because I have the Picard Legacy Collection, which is all 7 seasons of TNG, all 4 of the TNG movies, and all 3 seasons of Star Trek Picard. It's a fantastic set that comes with a deck of cards and some Chateau Picard coasters, which you will understand the significance of both of those as you get further into TNG. But just a heads up, when we get to Alex's emails, you may want to tread lightly with respect to spoilers, however you feel about it. That is at your discretion, good sir. Just wanted to give you a heads up with that. But I do look forward to hearing your thoughts on how you feel about TNG. With respect to your thoughts on Marvel movies, yeah, I understand the complaint that people have had visually with respect to Marvel films, but you're absolutely right that there most certainly have been exceptions. Just the other night, Shonda put on another exception, Black Panther. That is most certainly one of the exceptions with respect to the color tones and how vibrant or not Marvel films look. Like, they're definitely, 35 films, not every filmmaker is going to do the exact same thing, even with the assembly line process. There's no doubt about that. And I say we've seen more variety from phase 3 on than maybe we did with respect to some of the others. There are some stronger examples than others. And I would even say mid to late phase 3, and certainly into phase 4 and 5, we've seen some different things, I think, that maybe we didn't see in the first 2.5 phases of the franchise. Phase 1 being the exception, because that was still when they were shooting on film up until the first Avengers film in that regard. But no, I hear you. I am curious about Thunderbolts because it really does seem like Marvel's attempt at the Suicide Squad, and we'll see how that goes. And the Fantastic Four, the retrofuturistic thing, yeah, that does look intriguing. I am very curious to see how that goes. And as far as Daredevil is concerned, have you seen the director's cut, the extended cut, the one that's like 2 hours long? If you haven't, watch that one. There's a whole subplot and a bunch of other extra stuff that's put back into the film, and I personally consider it to be better than the theatrical version of Daredevil. I don't know if you've seen it, but yeah, I am totally, yes, that is a better film for a number of reasons. And there's even some things in the extended cut of the film that harken back, or I guess not harken back, but they do. There's more stuff in there that you see in the TV series than you saw in the theatrical version, right? Like some of the elements that I became aware of in the TV series, I then watched the director's cut of Daredevil not too long after that, and was like, oh wow, no, that was in the show. This is in the show. That kind of thing. So I think that that version of the film is the best version of that film, and it is certainly not a terrible film. I think it is one of the mid to stronger efforts in the Fox X-Men universe, if you will. That whole their whole continuity or lack thereof that they were putting together in the 2000s and into the early 2010s and all that, for sure. Definitely. I'm totally with you on that one. That is one to own. That is absolutely one to own. I do like that. I like Ben Affleck as Batman better, but he was not the issue, I think, with respect to Daredevil in that regard. He was in a different place as an actor, for no doubt about it. But yeah, I'm with you on that early 2000s alternative rock sound and all that, and the dark edginess of those types of movies, for sure. Thank you very much for sending in feedback. I look forward to more, good sir, and please let me know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Please, I hope I am. I really hope I have not butchered it. I apologize if I have, but I look forward to more of your emails, good sir. Welcome to the feedback circle here at Flight Chat. All right, from a newcomer to a long-time contributor here to Flight Chat, Waliyu Mustafa has a pair of emails, the first one of which he sent on Valentine's Day, February 14th. He has quite a bit to say. He says, hey, Ray, hope you had a good couple of weeks. I see the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Yes, they did. And on top of that, Kendrick Lamar gave a halftime performance no one will forget. Well, some might want to forget. LOL. Yeah, Drake for sure. I am not in the middle of all that. I really don't pay attention to that, but I, see from afar, and yeah. Whew, that was quite the performance indeed. But Waliyu says, anyway, first off, you asked about taking our kids to the cinema. I forgot to mention that on our 10th anniversary, we took Estelle to see Wicked, and she was as good as gold. I haven't taken Micah to the cinema since the Marvels because he's still unable to sit long enough to watch a movie. Oh, and by the way, we thoroughly enjoyed Wicked. Imagine my disappointment when I found out this was the first of a two-parter. Guess what we're doing for our 11th anniversary this year? LOL. Of course, no doubt about that. He says, speaking of which, we've been to see Captain America Brave New World today. That was the day it came out. Was it anywhere near as good as the other Cap movies? Nope. Was it great to see Anthony Mackie play Captain America? You damn right it was. I really enjoyed the cameo appearances by two characters, he says, and they be teasing something with that MacGuffin of theirs. Uncanny, some might say. Yeah. That's why my review of the movie had to be spoiler-filled, Waliyu, because, spoilers for Captain America Brave New World. Adamantium. Just, stop toying with me, Marvel Studios. But at any rate, Waliyu says, but overall I enjoyed it and look forward to seeing Mackie's Cap going forward. Also, it wouldn't hurt to see a series about Isaiah Bradley one day. Here's hoping. Also, Estelle was awake for most of the movie and did have a cry or two. And guess when she fell asleep? As the credits started to roll. Typical. Yes, indeed. Now on to some slightly disappointing news, he says. We know the Schuster estate wants to block the release of Superman in international markets, which includes the UK. That does worry me, he says. If that goes ahead and Warner Brothers Discovery is unable to come to an agreement, then it means I won't get to see the movie come July. Of course, it's not the first time the creators of Superman's estate have come after Warner's. This is why Man of Steel was released, and you now see by special arrangement with the Jerry Siegel family across all media credits. The same may be said for the Schuster estate, but it remains to be seen, he says. I really want to see this new Superman movie as it is my most anticipated movie of the year. Shocker? No, not at all. I'll keep an eye on the development of this and see what comes of it. Part of me does feel sorry for both Jerry and Joe. They deserved so much better way back when. I don't know if any of them get some kind of royalty for their creations, but personally, it's what they should be getting. It's long overdue. Of course, he says what this also does is promote piracy in those markets. Think about it. If Warner's and the Schuster estate cannot come to an agreement and the movie is blocked outside of the US and China, then you're hurting the consumers and also the box office for Warner's and thus the DCU as a whole. As you said, if Superman does not do well in terms of box office and critical reception, then we'll be lucky to see the rest of the slate. I really want to see the movie multiple times on the big screen. I have the costume, for goodness sake. Come on, Warners, please do the right thing and settle with the Schuster estate and keep everyone happy, especially your consumers. Wally, I absolutely understand your concerns. I will tell you that as much as we talk about, the stupidity of David Zaslav and the Warner Brothers Discovery regime and how much we've really gotten on their executives in the past, present, and future, I find it difficult to believe that they won't settle this. Because you got to look at the bottom line. And I think that all of these studios, the executives, they look at the bottom line. And the bottom line is you want your movie, you want your product in as many markets as possible. They're not going to shut the UK out. They're going to come to some agreement. I have to believe in the name of good business, not even necessarily in doing the right thing by the Schuster family. I think in the name of good business, it is their best interest to get this settled beforehand so that it does not skip the UK market. Not only do we want you to see, first and foremost, Wally, I want you to be able to see the movie. I want you to be able to take the family to see the movie. I would be very curious to see if Estelle sits through that one. Hopefully she does. Sounds like she was very well behaved for the most part at Brave New World. But yeah, I want you to see the movie. I want the UK to see the film. And you're absolutely right about the piracy concerns, that those will, without a doubt, ramp up if there's any type of blackout in any market outside of the US and China. So yeah, there's so many business reasons to just settle this and get this figured out. And don't tell me they don't have the money. Don't tell me they can't make this whole. They most certainly can. And enjoy what you hope will be the massive back end of, the big, huge success of the opening salvo for the DCU in that regard, right? It just makes all the sense in the world from a business standpoint for them to figure this out before we even get to a threat of it even being blocked in the UK. So yeah, I believe they will, and hopefully they do. If they don't, my goodness, you're talking about cutting DC Studios and James Gunn off at the knees, really badly, in an organizational sense if you don't figure this out. So Warner Brothers Discovery, don't cut your nose off to spite your face. Just do what needs to be done and get this, taken care of and swept under the rug as quickly as possible. No doubt about it. Continuing on with the rest of Wallyu's email, he asks, what do we think about the Fantastic Four First Steps trailer then? In my opinion, he says it was a great teaser. Sure, we didn't get any look at Reed Richards' powers, but the overall aesthetic, really good, he says. I love the retro-futuristic look the movie has. I think we all do, definitely. And seriously, how good does Ben Grimm look? Like he was literally brought to life from Jack Kirby's artwork. I have to say, though, they all look like they were ripped out of the pages of the comic book. And Galactus, actually looking like Galactus. Look forward to the next trailer where I hope we'll see Reed's powers and also Julia Garner's Silver Surfer. Yeah, I hadn't talked about Ben Grimm's thing. It really, the aesthetic does look ripped off the page, seriously. And I'm good with that. I like that. I think it's going in, trying to go in a comic accurate direction with the thing, like an old school Jack Kirby comic accurate direction with the thing, I think is not only good for this aesthetic, this retrofuturistic aesthetic, but I think it's a good move in general for like the next incarnation of the thing that we're going to see. We saw the Michael Chiklis way, which was, mid 2000s, like kind of realism way, if you will, for as realistic as a character like the Thing can get. And then we saw the full CGI and Fan Four Stick. Now we're going for comic accuracy in a CGI manner. So yeah, I like it. I like the design. I like the classic nature of it. Classic is a good way to describe this trailer, I think. The classic nature of it definitely bodes well, and we have high hopes. We do. We have some optimistic hopes for that film, no doubt about it. Wally then says, we also saw the trailer for Jurassic World Rebirth. I had no idea this was even being made until I saw the first image released last year. I have to say, it kind of feels out of place. I thought the last movie, Dominion, ended the franchise in a good way, but it will be interesting to see how this one goes. I won't be seeing it in the cinema when it releases due to both Superman and Fantastic Four. I mean, July is busy enough with just those two. I have a feeling Jurassic World Rebirth will probably be the weaker of the three movies in terms of box office. I would tend to agree. Yeah, it's hard to say though, because as I mentioned earlier in John's email, the last three Jurassic World movies have all touched $1 billion. They've gone down, each year, like 1.6 for Jurassic World, 1.3 for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and just a little over 1 billion for Jurassic World Dominion, which I haven't seen yet. I own the movie. I have the nice steelbook box set of the six Jurassic World movies, six Jurassic Park and World movies. I've not watched Dominion yet. I need to. I most certainly need to. I have it at my disposal, no doubt about it. But so I'll have to watch it and see what you're talking about in terms of how it ends, how it ended the franchise, how it ended the storyline and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know, because we're not certain precisely where the general audience is going to sit with Superman, and we're not really that certain how they're going to sit with Fantastic Four. I mean, we know how the general audience historically has sat with Avengers. We know how they sit with Spider-Man. We know how they sit with Deadpool and Wolverine. We're not certain about Fantastic Four, right? We're in really like unknown territory with all three of these movies. It will be interesting to see, what places they're in, who's first, who's second, who's third, with respect to the general audience perspective in July. It should be intriguing. I mean, there's definitely room for all of them to do well and eat, depending on, who has the best legs going forward in that regard. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Be very intriguing. July is really busy. Busier than even any of us may have thought, to be honest with you. He says, saw the new Thunderbolts trailer, still not sold on the movie, but maybe I will catch it on opening weekend. We'll see. Now, I got you. I hear you. I'm intrigued by it, but, Marvel's take on Suicide Squad, we'll see how that goes. To me, it's a tall order, to live up to, even David Ayer's original, whether it's the studio version, which is the only version of it that we've seen, or his original ideas that, many of us are aware of, or even James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which I still think is James Gunn's best comic book movie to date right now, to be honest with you. Hopefully I will say differently on July 11th, but we'll see how that goes, But yeah, tall order, I think. We'll see how that goes with respect to Thunderbolts in May. He says, got round to watching Kraven the Hunter. It wasn't a bad movie, he says, but I still liked what it did. Still a shame we won't be getting any more of these movies going forward. I really was looking forward to seeing all these villains and anti-heroes show up together in an ensemble movie or three. But such is the way of fandom, we don't always get what we want. Or rather, this is why we can't have nice things. Yeah, so many people, so many fans have just absolutely shat all over the Sony Spider-Man universe. And to me, maybe it's just because I've seen so many comic book movies from 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, whatnot. But anybody out there that wants to sit there and tell me that the Venom movies or Morbius or Madam Web or Craven are the worst comic book movies I've ever seen, I will still tell you you're a child and you have not seen very many comic book movies. And that's fine. You don't have to like the Sony Spider-Man universe movies, but to me, they're not even close to the worst comic book movies I've ever seen. I would absolutely watch each and every one of those movies over Supergirl from 1984 or Howard the Duck in the 1980s, right? Those are comic book films. I would watch them over Superman 3 and 4, and I own Superman 3 and 4, okay? I have that particular steelbook box set as well. There's so many other movies that I would watch the Sony Spider-Verse movies over in that regard. And you know how much I enjoy Venom, right? Do I think the first one is the best? Yes. But do I still like Let There Be Carnage and the Last Dance? Yes, absolutely I do. I own all of them in that regard. But either way, you know what? It is what it is. Kraven the Hunter is coming out in Glorious Steelbook in another week or so, and it'll become part of the collection. I will add it because I did have fun with it. It's not the greatest movie in the world, but I don't need every comic book movie to be the greatest movie in the world. Not everything is going to be Zack Snyder's Justice League. Not everything is going to be Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Not everything is going to be Spider-Man into or across the Spider-Verse. Just saying in that regard, right? To name some of the top flight superhero movies I've seen in the last decade or so, to be honest with you. Continuing on, Wally says, oh, I forgot to mention both Skeleton Crew and the final season of What If were incredible, he says. Skeleton Crew for me was like the Goonies in space, and those kids were amazing. We all love Neil and KB. Those two for me stole the show. Jude Law was a crafty beggar throughout the series. I still need to watch Skeleton Crew. It's ridiculous that I haven't watched it yet. As for the final season of What If, he says, I loved the daily release of the episodes. I had actually forgotten that they were doing that until I saw 2 days later there were 2 new episodes to watch. I must say the daily release worked for this final season, and I think it works better for that time of year and for animation. Who knows if we will see anything like that again, but what a finale for the show. That is cool. Daily release for animated series. I like that. It's very intriguing. I still need to watch What If, period, because I've seen none of it to this point. Yeah, the list is long. Ugh, too much shit to watch. Anyway, Wally says one last thing in this first email. He says, to prepare for Daredevil Born Again, we're rewatching the original show on Disney Plus, and I have to say, it is still one of the best comic book TV shows ever made. That hallway scene in the second episode is still top tier stuff. Very interested to see how Born Again furthers the character and the other characters when it begins next month. Yes, indeed. Daredevil, is that another? They've released that one on Blu-ray, have they not? I gotta look that up. I'm pretty sure they have, but that's definitely one to add to the collection because I'm pretty sure Born Again and the others like that'll come out probably in a future wave of MCU TV series. I have all of those too, by the way. I've got WandaVision, I've got The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I have Loki seasons 1 and 2, I have Moon Knight, and I have Hawkeye. I have all of them, and out of all of them, the only one I haven't watched is Loki season 2. I need to watch that. Need to get on that. And weirdly enough, I also didn't watch the last episode of Hawkeye. I forget exactly what happened around that time. I watched the first 5 episodes and then didn't watch that last one. Weird in that regard. But either way, yeah, definitely a lot to look forward to and a lot to watch with respect to our favorite franchises. But let's get to Wallyu's second email. I like this title. He called it My, How the Tables Have Turned. And this was a week later, actually a couple of days ago he sent this in. He said, so Captain America Brave New World has proved popular with audiences. Who saw that coming? I have to be honest, I did go into the movie with very low expectations. Not because of Anthony Mackie, but because I had no idea about the movie's plot, besides Thaddeus Ross becoming Red Hulk. But I was pleasantly surprised with the film and how it unfolded. The discovery of adamantium, your reaction to that was hilarious. Yes, and painful. Adamantium. Anyway, and Sam Wilson surfing on a missile, he said. He surfed on a missile while Red Wing carried the shield. Hot damn, he typed that in all caps. Yeah, no, that was pretty badass, no doubt. He says, anyway, enough about the movie itself. Moving on to the reaction from the so-called MCU fans. The one who were surprised and shook that Captain America is black. And why would Steve Rogers pass the mantle onto him and not Bucky, yada yada. Spoiler alert, Sam Wilson became Captain America in the comics way back in 2012. Maybe those idiots should read a comic once in a while. They might learn something. Or maybe they should watch The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the show that makes the transition, right? Like, this was all settled. This was already hashed out. This wasn't a surprise. There was a whole show, 6 episodes of one of the better MCU shows devoted to this. They didn't watch that either? Well, you can't expect racist bigots to be burdened with facts in that regard. But Wally says on Threads, there's been a fair amount of positive reactions from people who loved the movie, including shutting down the trolls who said the movie was going to be a flop. What you said in your latest FLITEcast episode this week about how the MCU has now reached a stage whereby the fans and critics are no longer appreciating the movies and giving them the VIP treatment they once had was spot on. We DC fans know how that feels. We are seasoned veterans. Welcome to the club, MCU fans. It is not pleasant. No, it's not pleasant. That's why I did that episode. We need to talk about the MCU because, yeah, everything that we could have predicted was going to happen with the fan base, it's happening now. Most certainly it is. The divisions are occurring whether MCU fans want to, admit it or not. And, all the questions and all the criticisms that, people have levied against the MCU, now they're being parroted by its own fan base. No, the honeymoon is over. The honeymoon is absolutely over for the MCU fans in that regard, until they do another massive team up that makes them $1 million, which they've got plenty of opportunity for that, but we'll see how that goes going forward. But Wally says, what's more interesting is that the movie, Captain America Brave New World, that is, opens during Black History Month, and given what we have had so far with the Super Bowl and the Grammys, it's like Black excellence has taken center stage, and we are here to show the world what we are all about. America and even the UK have been built on the backs of black people for centuries, and we are basically telling the world, we've always been here, y'all didn't want to take notice. That's all I will say on that front. I got a fist in the air for that one, Wally. Yes, hell yes. No doubt about that. You know I echo those sentiments, my brother. No doubt. Anyway, he says, just going back to that Threads post I sent you earlier this week. Yeah, the big one that I quoted in We Need to Talk About the MCU, and I also did an extra episode of Flight Speed talking about it on Patreon as well. He said, how true is it that our perspective on things has changed? I know for me, apart from Superman, I hardly get excited about anything these days. If I'm interested in something, I will check it out. If I like it, I will give it praise. If I don't like it, I will say that I don't like it and move on. But these days, why do people feel it's acceptable to rant about what they don't like and then pile on people who do like that stuff? Like Star Trek Discovery. Goodness, I enjoyed that show, and it's because of that show I ended up watching the likes of Picard, Lower Decks, and Strange New Worlds. Of course, I've always liked Star Trek, but I could never get into the TV shows before Disco. I thoroughly enjoy the movies, but the recent shows have definitely been worth watching. Yeah, and of course, I will also take this opportunity to note, Wally, you, that those other shows that you listed, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks, and Star Trek Strange New Worlds, all came out after the first 2 seasons of Star Trek Discovery. Imagine that. The success of Star Trek Discovery led to an expansion of the TV universe. And by the way, one of those shows is about to release a 3rd season, and a 4th season has begun production, if I'm not mistaken, that being Strange New Worlds. So the expansion of Star Trek, born out of the success of Star Trek Discovery, well documented, and you, sir, are definitely a part of that expansion. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And he says, anyway, what I was going to say was, can we just accept that as fans of certain franchises, we need to admit to ourselves that we have changed. Our viewpoints have changed. Our tastes have changed. Yes, movies are not what they used to be, but that's why we have physical media or streaming platforms to be able to rewatch those movies of yesteryear. And I can't believe I just used that word. No one, and I repeat, no one is taking those movies away from us. So if someone does decide it's time to reboot, remake, revive Back to the Future, let's reserve judgment until the movie has been released. Can we do that, please? Your childhood has not been ruined because someone else decided to make it for a new generation, he says. After all, at the end of the day, the original still exists. It hasn't been erased from existence. Nice quote there. I like that. Please chill the F out and go out and touch some grass or something. I think that'll do it for me, he says. I'm going to watch a new episode of Invincible. Oh, man, Invincible. It's another one I'm behind on. Jeez. Oh, okay. He says, then look to finish off the final 4 episodes of Cobra Kai and then to start season 3 of Reacher. Reacher has 3 seasons? Oh, man. He says, so much to watch, so little time. You take care, Ray, and give my best to Shonda. Thank you, Wally Mustafa. Yes, thank you indeed for the feedback, Wally. And you know that I 100% agree with everything that you said. You know, and as I turn to look at my physical media collection, I am staring straight at my Back to the Future Steelbook 4K trilogy, right? All 3 of those films. Guess when I get to watch them? Whenever the hell I want. That's right. And regardless of what remakes or reboots or revivals come out, if they decide to bring back Michael J. and Christopher Lloyd and do them AI style, right? Which, of course, is a nightmare for a number of people. Like, they decide to do that. Nothing, absolutely nothing will take away my ability to watch that original trilogy, that golden trilogy, one of my favorite trilogies. And Back to the Future, the first one, is one of my favorite movies of all time. Nothing will stop me from being able to watch those films. And that is the ultimate thing that I feel like a lot of us need to recognize and remember, is that we control our own feelings and our own thoughts with respect to these things. If you want your childhood to be ruined, you're the one ruining it. You're the one making that choice. Studios aren't. Studios are trying to introduce it to a new generation. That's why I'll also look a couple of shelves down on my collection. I'm looking at a steelbook copy of The Lion King. You know which version of The Lion King I own? It's not the 2019 live-action animation version that made $1.6 billion for Disney that I saw at the theater and didn't really care for. No, it's the original 1994 animated classic. and I can watch that as many times as I want and not watch the 2019 version and certainly not watch the Mufasa prequel because I have no interest in those, and the existence of those movies do not take away my ability to enjoy the original 1994 classic ever. Period. Especially since I own the damn thing in physical media, glorious steelbook form. So, there you have it. I'm with you on that. One thought, I'm with you on that. We are simpatico and lockstep with all of your sentiments on that, Wally. And on top of that, you also continue to remind me just how much I have to watch and how behind I am on so many things. I got to get going here. Seriously, I got to get off my ass. I got to watch plenty of movies and plenty of TV shows. But thank you as always, good sir. Give my best to the other half and the family as well. Hope you are all doing incredibly well. And I certainly do hope that situation with the Schuster estate and Warner Brothers Discovery gets settled so that you will indeed be able to carry out your grand plan for watching Superman this July. I believe it will, but here's hoping that it most certainly does. No doubt about it, good sir. All right, next up, Stu Little checking in with an email titled Brave New Saturday Night. He says, hey, long time no email. Hope you're doing well. He says, my workplace was shut down in October, but me and most of the other people from there transferred to a bigger branch of the cinema elsewhere, which has been rewarding in several ways, he says. If a bit of an adjustment that has asked me to learn a few more skills, like working a bar and serving Baskin Robbins, the latter being a huge pain in the arse. Oh, all right, sorry to hear that. I'd like to also repeat something in the vein of previous cinema worker PSAs. The back row is not a designated messy zone, and as the last place one checks when cleaning, it is the most mentally damaging to find has left stuff there, you scumbags. Yeah, I've never worked in a theater, but I can attest, being a theater goer, that yeah, it's awful. People they're very uncouth and unkempt when they go to a movie theater, and that is very unfortunate, sad to see. I throw all my stuff away, and I don't dump everywhere. The theater's not a damn trash can, as far as I'm concerned in that regard. But you know what? It is what it is. I salute you, Stu, and hope that you persevere through all the bullshit with respect to that. He says, that said, I'm writing to talk about a few recent films I've seen. First one is Companion, starring Sophie Thatcher from the Book of Boba Fett and Heretic. Yes, I'd forgotten that she was in that, but I took one look. When people were showing the picture of her in the speeder, I was like, oh yeah, her, gotcha. And Jack Quaid, Logan Lucky, and a few other things you might have heard of. Oh yeah, just Star Trek, The Boys, My Adventures with Superman. Yeah, Jack Quaid is everywhere these days, seriously. Stu says, this is a darkly comic thriller with a sci-fi aspect I won't go into if you haven't seen the trailer, because I think it'll be better not knowing. But suffice to say, the two leads are in a relationship and go on a weekend away to the private estate of a wealthy Russian associate, played by Rupert Friend, with some other pals, and stuff happens. You're spoiler phobic, so I won't go into specifics, but it's a very tight, entertaining experience with nicely explored twists and turns, and a great handling of tone from properly menacing to more funny and satirical side of it. Thatcher and Quaid are paired together well for who they're playing, and their dynamic and supporting cast, which also includes Harvey Guillen, fill out the story well, and it effectively delivers in a relatively shorter runtime too. I am curious about Companion. I definitely, and I've already seen the early images of the Steelbook 4K release, and I like it. It's a simplistic design, but I like the scheme of it. So yeah, I am curious, and of course I am a fan of Jack Quaid, definitely, and Sophie Thatcher. I haven't seen Heretic, but I am one of the 4 people that like the Book of Boba Fett, so I'm cool on seeing what she does in this particular role as well. Next up, he's got some thoughts on Saturday Night. Oh, here we go. Yeah, this is a little bit older. He said a bit of a belated entry, this one, as it only just got a UK release after a limited October theatrical run in the States last year. It's Jason Reitman's dramatization of the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live, following almost in real time the stuff that had to be dealt with in the 90 minutes leading to the first episode by a young Lorne Michaels, played by the Fabelman's lead, Gabriel LaBelle. It's fast-paced, hilarious, and juggles a lot of little subplots, and the now much more well-known names of Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Chevy Chase, played by Gotham's Corey Michael Smith, Billy Crystal, Garrett Morris, inaugural host George Carlin, Andy Kaufman, and Jim Henson, with those last two portrayed by Nicholas Braun so well I didn't realize it until later. Wow, he played Andy Kaufman and Jim Henson? That's insane. Okay, now that makes me even more curious to watch this, eventually, at some point, down the road, on the list. While I have no doubt there's stuff fabricated for the movie, he says, I'm confident that Reitman, given his family connections, probably knew a lot of stories about SNL that fed into what makes up the plot. You would hope so, definitely. Haven't heard Aykroyd or Chase or any of the others complain about it, so we'll see. And I haven't heard Lorne complain about it, but I haven't really watched a whole lot of interviews with them about it either. So either way, he says the film captures the anxiety and pressure Michaels must have experienced pioneering such a show at the time, dealing not only with the cast and crew, but the studio's scrutiny, with Willem Dafoe as network executive Dave Tibet hovering over things, waiting for any sign the show won't be fit to go out on air, in addition to production issues, contract disputes, the censors shredding the script, pure-hearted Jim Henson suffering cruel pranks from people who don't think his dumb puppet segment is worth respecting, and more. Wow, that part of the movie might actually piss me off, because I'm a huge Jim Henson fan. May he rest in peace. It's amazing how it fits so much in and manages to keep up a real tension when you know with real life knowledge how successful SNL became, Stu says. But it keeps finding little minutes of scenes to throw stuff in, like J.K. Simmons as Mr. Television Milton Berle showing up to swing his dick about and clash with Chevy Chase, or a phone conversation Michaels has with an iconic TV personality of the era. Overall, it's a good time whose many parts all come together beautifully, and I'm pretty surprised at how totally snubbed it was in the Oscar nominations. I think at least a Best Original Screenplay nom would have made sense. Yeah, perhaps it also might have been too close to home for the industry as far as like Lorne Michaels and Saturday Night Live and all that is concerned, because, it's 50-50. Like, I could see it going one way and I could see it going another way. I'll just say it doesn't surprise me that it got snubbed. It might not have been highbrow enough for the Oscar voters and the Academy in that regard. We'll see, in that regard. But finally, he's got some thoughts on Captain America Brave New World. Stu says, now, I may have a reputation as a Marvel Studios hater, but it's only because they're held up as the gold standard. So I don't think it's unfair to hold them to a certain standard, especially when, from my perspective, their success ought to give them less in the way of excuses when I feel they fail, usually because they can't get out of their own way, in my view, he says. I also give them credit where it's due when I do enjoy something. For instance, I recently got around to watching Agatha All Along, which I anticipated would follow certain formulas, only to be pleasantly surprised at how bold it was and willing to be a complex villain story that, in my view, is better than the show it's a spin-off from. So with that in mind, I am pleased to say, he says, that despite worries with all the additional shoots and the 2-hour runtime, that I did not think that Brave New World was a bad film at all. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's sort of the Captain America movie I wanted. Admittedly, it does this by emulating Winter Soldier in some aspects, and in the third act, it's more noticeable where changes were made with more apparent ADR and green screen inserts or whole new scenes that obviously weren't in principal photography. But it still works overall, he says, and I think the overall more serious tone, though not without some levity, and well done set pieces keep it solid. Also helping is that I think this is a better showing for Anthony Mackie as Captain America than in his debut in the Disney Plus show, focusing more on what he represents and his personal journey to realize that and gain confidence in a clearer way. Carl Lumbly gets a good showing too as Isaiah Bradley, playing more of a mentor role. Also, Harrison Ford, for all of his jokey "they paid me money" responses when asked why he took the role, actually works hard to make Ross a bit more of a complex and troubled character than we've seen before. I wasn't expecting that level of nuance, and I'm only a little sad that William Hurt didn't get a shot at playing the character in this form. In summation, while I don't think it matches Winter Soldier's political sci-fi action stylings as well, or as entertaining as the pulpy goodness of First Avenger, I would call it an improvement on Civil War. Interesting. I forget where I have it ranked with respect to Civil War. I forget if I have it below or above. I've got to do that Patreon episode about my rankings here pretty soon, because I did re-adjudicate it, but I'll figure that out later. Stu says, and finally, as I was writing this up, I was also watching the end of Cobra Kai, which is one of the most enjoyable feel-good shows I think Netflix has. Good emotionality, high-stakes drama, and lovable cheese. Take care, Stu. Stu, that's an awesome recap, an awesome send-up. Thank you for the insight into Companion and Saturday Night, and also your thoughts on Brave New World. I really do feel like more of us do like that movie than not in that regard, and at the very least we'll call it mid-tier, if not higher tier, if you will. I mean, you're saying better than Civil War, and that's, again, I'd have to revisit where I ranked Civil War in relation to it. I will say that the joke that I made at the beginning of my review where I said I've been waiting years for the third Solo Cap movie, and I finally got it. Because yes, this is a Solo Cap movie, and Civil War is still Avengers 2.5 to me in that regard. So if we're calling it better in terms of being a Solo Cap movie, I'll definitely agree with that. Absolutely, this is actually a Solo Cap movie in that regard. But yeah, I think that's very intriguing how you believe that, in your mind, Cap, Sam Wilson's Cap is better developed here than in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think there's some other perspectives and some other storylines in that show that maybe hit a little bit home stronger for me than for you, Stu. Me being a black man, that there are definitely some cultural aspects of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier that I think ring stronger to me, and that's probably why I still think that progression of his character is stronger there. But again, it's subjective and it's a matter of perspective. I would not expect you to see it the same way, and it's unfair to say that you should see it the same way because we don't have the same perspective in that regard, nor should we in that regard. So I don't want you to think I'm holding your feet to the fire on that. It's just that's where I think perhaps our perspectives differ on Anthony Mackie's development of Sam Wilson between The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and this movie. I totally get why you say that, because he absolutely goes through some stuff and does have an arc, if you will, in this particular film. But yeah, it's very interesting, very, very intriguing. But I wasn't sure what you were going to think about it, Stu, and I hear you on the third act stuff, with like the shots and the reshoot stuff that was put back in. But you have been hard on the MCU in the past. That is true, but you are favorable to this one. So, very telling, if you will, that someone like Stu and also myself, we've both been critical of the MCU in the past, and we both came out enjoying this film more than not, whereas we've got longtime MCU fans that just want to kill this thing with fire, apparently, allegedly. That think the franchise needs to be rebooted because of how weak and, not up to par this particular film is in their subjective estimation. So very intriguing to see how the tables have indeed turned with respect to that. But thank you as always for your feedback, Stu. Looking forward to more of your recaps and more of your thoughts as well. And hopefully at some point I can watch these things so you don't have to be quite as spoiler averse with your reviews and chiming in on certain things, good sir. All right, next up, we have a pair of emails from Alex De Silva, interested in Star Trek, but of course he talks about many other things as well. Let's hear what he has to say this particular week. He says, "Hey Ray, I definitely have to disagree with what you said about basketball not being played in the paint anymore as a result of three-pointers. Players are definitely still driving to the rim and going for dunks and layups in every game. When it comes to the Celtics specifically, the frustration among the fan base is that sometimes they just settle for threes when it's not the best shot that could be taken at that moment. When they do drive and attack the rim, they're a really fun team to watch, and the abundance of threes are just icing on the cake." Alex, you're on an island with that. Believe me. Find 10 fans of the NBA, find 10 fans of basketball, and ask them if they agree with you, and they won't. They will not. Because as much as you might think that threes are just the icing on the cake, the reality of the situation is we have data. We can watch the games with our eyes. And when I see, and I've seen this for the last number of years, whenever I have tuned into an NBA game, when I see 20-point leads evaporate in the first few minutes of the next quarter, that's not driving to the lane. That's not attacking the rim. That's hitting threes. And granted, I understand three-point percentages are up, three-point numbers are up. Look at the statistics, man. It's there demonstrably and objectively speaking in this case. In this case, it's not all subjective, right? It may be subjective in terms of how you were perceiving it, but it is not subjective in terms of the actual data and what is going on. Go look at the numbers. Go look at what is happening. Go look at how the scores have skyrocketed. Do you realize that averaging 110 points allowed in a game is considered really good defensively? That was not the case back in the going to work Pistons days. Remember Ben Wallace, remember Chauncey Billups, Tayshaun Prince and Rip Hamilton and Rasheed Wallace. Those, remember when they beat the Indiana Pacers 69-61 in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. That happened. They held Kobe Bryant and Shaq and that Lakers group with Gary Payton and Karl Malone. They held those guys to like 60 points in one game at one point. Seriously, that was when defense was actually played differently, and that was when there was more of a post game. That was when there were more points in the paint to be scored. It's not that way anymore, man. And believe me, majority of basketball fans see that. Like, go look at the numbers. When I see these 20-point leads evaporate as quickly as they have, and look, I get it because when Steph came into the game, Steph Curry, we're talking basketball here for a second. When Steph came into the game and became like the greatest 3-point shooter of all time, right? When that happened, yeah, he did change things because he wasn't just taking threes from the arc, he was taking threes from like 5 feet behind the arc, and he still does that shit. And he changed the game. He did. He most certainly did. But you're seeing more and more players, including big men, step back and try to be Steph Curry as opposed to going into the lane. And come on, man, look at the load management stuff, right? These players that don't want to get hurt, they won't drive into the paint and be physical nearly as much anymore because they don't want to get hurt. They want to stay out of the injury zone, and they're managing themselves. Load management shouldn't be a thing, but it totally is in the NBA, where somebody pays money to see a superstar like LeBron James play for the Lakers, and oh no, he's got this week off because we're managing his load. Stuff like that. Come on, man. No, I'm sorry, Alex. I have to take issue with you on that one. You're welcome to disagree, but I feel like I have objective data and an eyeball test as well to back me up on this one with respect to how basketball itself has changed, especially in the NBA. That dunks and layups in every game, yeah, you see them, but count those versus the amount of 3-point attempts and 3-point hits in that regard. It's not even close. Not anymore. Not these days. It's just how the league has evolved. It is what it is, unfortunately. Unfortunately for me, maybe not so for you and others that like that type of game being played in the NBA. But either way, let's move on to some of the more nerdy stuff, although that was pretty nerdy. Sports can get very nerdy, as I've pointed out many times over the years. Fantasy football is just tabletop RPG for sports people, for jocks. I digress. Alex says, what'd you think about the Fantastic Four trailer? I thought it looked decent, and it's going to take some getting used to for the 50s, 60s vibe, since that'll be mostly uncharted territory for the MCU. I think the general sentiment from all of us is that we dig the retro futuristic vibe, and we're very curious to see what it is. And as far as I hear you saying it's going to take some getting used to, but I think a lot of us are welcoming that. We want to see something different. It does look fresh. It does look different than the rest of the MCU vibe and aesthetic that we've become accustomed to over the last almost 17 years. So yeah, to see something different, to see something multiversal in terms of how this incarnation of the Fantastic Four is being represented, yeah, I'm very curious. I would say out of all of the MCU movies this year, that one is probably the one that I would be most anticipating. It's not my most anticipated comic book film of the year. That certainly would go to Superman, no doubt about it. But I am quite curious and definitely mostly anticipating. It's my most anticipated MCU film in that regard, for sure. So yeah, I thought the teaser was great and looking forward to it, for sure. He says, the trailer for Jurassic World Rebirth looked good too. Looks like they're going back to basics with this one and just telling a dinosaur story set on an island rather than trying to branch far out like the Jurassic World movies did. And I'm not even a Jurassic World trilogy hater by any means. I'm just looking forward to this simplified approach. Yeah, you could almost call it the Jurassic Park approach, right? Because even though World completely took place on an island, I hear what you're saying in terms of Fallen Kingdom and the expansion they went with there. And I have not seen Dominion yet. I need to watch Dominion to see exactly how that all culminated. You would have thought I would have watched it by now, seriously, considering they brought all the OGs back, right? Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum all came back to join Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard and the others. Like, I should totally watch that pretty soon here. I own it. I own the damn thing. I have it. It's right there. I'm looking at it right now. But either way, I hear you. They're going back to the Jurassic Park approach, if you will. With the exception of the last 20 minutes of The Lost World, which The Lost World, I think, might still be my favorite of the Jurassic Park films, to be honest with you. I really like that one. Really, really like that one. Either way. He says, I watched a few episodes this time around for The Next Generation. All right, Amr, if you're listening, I'm just going to give you the warning in case you're concerned about spoilers. He's into season 2, so he's well ahead of you. But here he's going to talk about peak performance. He says, I had no idea what was happening in the Stratagema game, which I think was the point. I love Data's strategy to win through a stalemate, as well as his comment about how he busted his opponent up. Oh yeah, I remember when I first watched that as a kid. That was like the punchline. That was like the big punctuation of the episode for sure. And it's the one time that you see Pulaski like actually rooting for Data because of how smug Kohlrami was being like this, I'm stratagem of this, stratagem of master. Just he was such a smug bastard, and everybody wanted to see him taken down a peg, and we knew Data could do it. So I was like, okay, go ahead and do it. And when he finally did, and he threw him off his game and was like, you have insulted me, and he stormed off. Oh, that made the episode. That was arguably like the best part of the episode. I mean, all the war game stuff and everything with the Hathaway and all that was fine, but like the stratagem stuff was like the big part. Like that was what we were watching. That was like the big part of the episode, I feel, for us in that regard. Then he says, next up was the season 2 finale, Shades of Grey. Oh boy, here we go. Alex says, this episode was basically a clip show. I wonder why they decided to just do it from Riker's perspective and not a general clip show of the whole crew. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe for character appeal, maybe they tested and said, well, Riker has the most appeal with this demographic, and we're going to center it around him. Maybe something to that effect. But yeah, Shades of Grey is definitely one of those weaker episodes for sure, Alex, that is just not considered a high point for the franchise at all. But you know what? You're through season 2. Here we go. You're through the rough stuff. You have passed successfully through the rough patch of TNG, and now we're getting into season 3. Here we go. This is where things are going to start to perk up, Alex. You watched Evolution, you said, the season 3 premiere. It says it looks like their uniforms are slightly different now, especially around the collars. That is correct. The collars are now raised. They've taken the, that color bar, if you will, the color lines that they had on the chest and the shoulder, like that's done. Like these are definitely a more pronounced version of the uniforms. Get used to this. This is the look that they will be modifying going forward for the rest of the show. Just to give you that heads up in that regard. He says the opening monologue is different too. More crazy images. It gives off a real Wonders of the Universe vibe. Yes, that is also true. This will now be the open, largely, for the entire rest of the series. You will see Saturn. You will see all the other crazy images, that nebula and everything like that. Yes, this is what you will see going forward for the rest of the show. Yes, so get used to that. And the music also is different. Like when you hear the music, how it sounds, like how I think McCarthy was the one that did this. The way that you hear that theme, what you hear from this point on, this is how it's going to sound going forward, with a few subtle changes based on season going forward for the rest of the show. All right. He says Stubbs asking Troy to turn off her beam into his soul is actually really relatable, he says. I would also have my guard up around her if I was on board the Enterprise. I'd hate for someone to just be able to read my feelings at any moment. Yeah, and that's part of the deal with Troy is, whether she says it or not, putting people on edge because of her abilities is kind of part of the deal, right? Like if you have nothing to hide, you're not that worried about it. But if you have something to hide, well then, and it's also important to note, as she pointed out in the pilot, that she can't completely read thoughts. She can sense strong emotions because she's only half Betazoid. Remember, her father was human. Her mother, Luoxana, is full Betazoid. Now she can read minds. Luoxana can full on read minds in that regard, but Deanna can only read strong and sense strong emotions, right? So that, and they do remain relatively consistent with that going forward, because you definitely run into cases where she can't sense everything that is going on in a person's mind with respect to a given situation in an episode. So that is definitely something to remember going forward. But no, I hear you, because from the outside looking in, you don't care if it's half Betazoid, quarter Betazoid, full, whatever. You're treating them all as mind readers. And I totally understand keeping your guard up with somebody like that around you aboard a starship. No doubt about it. He says, finally, for this first email, I watched the Ensigns of Command. The best part of the episode, he said, was the start when Picard gets a call during the musical performance and leaves, and Data's looking like, wow, am I really that bad? Other than that, I thought this episode was really boring overall, and I just really don't have much to say about it. On to the next. Next episode is called The Survivors. So the Ensigns of Command, it's not an action-packed episode. It is definitely like a talkie, if you will, because the whole idea of these people need to get off this planet that the Sheliak Consortium is going to take over, and if they don't, the Sheliak will come and eradicate them, and they have a short window of time to be able to do it, and not enough resources, and so it's two different plot lines going on. You got Data on the planet trying to convince the settlers to leave, and their leader Goshevin won't let them leave, And then you've got Picard trying to buy more time to get them 3 weeks to evacuate everybody on the planet before the Sheliak take over. And so, I mean, I like the tension and I like the balance between the two plot lines, but I hear you. If you're looking for something more action packed, no, you didn't get it. There's really not a whole lot of action in this particular episode. It's definitely a more cerebral episode in terms of, like, people being uprooted from their homes in that regard. I am curious, very curious to hear what your thoughts will be about The Survivors, because The Survivors is one of those episodes that, whether people know it by name, everybody kind of talks about the implications of precisely what happens and what goes on in that particular episode. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on The Survivors. Looking forward to that, good sir. And that is not what is in your next email. Your next email is, as you put it, a quick follow-up to say that you really like Cap 4, he says. And he says, I truly don't get where all the hate for it is coming from, Brave New World, that is. There were some fun action sequences, and the highlight for me was the Celestial Island sequence. That was just pure fun. Yeah, I love the fact, spoilers of course, that Celestial Island was referenced, because, again, that's always been a question throughout the fandom, is like, are they ever going to acknowledge that there's just, part of an Eternal sticking out of the ocean, like in the MCU? And they not only have, but apparently it's full of adamantium. Adamantium. All right. Not going to go down that rabbit hole again. But Alex says, I really wish they hadn't spoiled the Red Hulk reveal in all the marketing. Imagine how much of a surprise that would have been, at least to people who aren't deep into the comics. It's the same thing as the Hulk spoiler in the Thor Ragnarok marketing. I wish Marvel would have just shown more faith in this movie than trying to pull in crowds by ruining the final set piece. Because of the marketing, nothing about the final act of the movie is a surprise, since you're just waiting for the Red Hulk sequence since it hasn't happened yet. A few years ago, I was introducing two friends of mine to the MCU who hadn't seen it before, and when we got to Thor Ragnarok, they obviously had no idea what to expect. When we got to the Hulk reveal in the Gladiator Arena, my two friends went nuts and were delighted by the reveal, because they truly did not see that coming. I was simultaneously happy for them, but also envious that they got to have that experience, like unlike any of us who follow these movies as they're released. Oh well, can't change that now. I still enjoyed Cap 4. I just would have liked it if it could have been all a surprise. Live long and prosper, Alex. So I'm 50-50 on this, Alex, because on the one hand, I totally get what you're saying. It would have been awesome if, the point where you find out where his friend discovers that, the leader's been dosing him with gamma radiation. You're like, oh no, that's what's happening. He's turning into a Hulk. Like, that revelation and just waiting to see how shit's going to hit the fan would have been amazing. I totally get you on that. By the same token, I also see the business aspect of it where, instead of it being a surprise, they want to use it as a lure to bring the audience in to say, oh, well, here's a red one. What kind of chaos is he going to pull? Is he going to cause in the movie? Same with the marketing for Thor Ragnarok. I hear you on that. And I would say that your example that you brought up, just going over this again, you said you introduced two friends of yours to the MCU who hadn't seen it before. They didn't know what to expect with Ragnarok, which means they hadn't seen any of the marketing beforehand, right? And they were freaking out when they saw Hulk show up. Well, I would argue that from Marvel's standpoint, that is how they expect the general audience to react. I would guess that out of all the general audience that have seen Captain America Brave New World, I would guess that a large part of them were shocked, were surprised in that regard, truthfully. Or at least more of them were surprised than any of us would have been. And financially speaking, like, I know people are going to talk about, and I've already seen this, people talk about like the massive 82.4% drop off in the second week, because, oh my goodness, we care so much about second week drop offs now. But this movie is approaching $300 million worldwide, 289.4 million earned worldwide. So, I mean, you can say that perhaps that's where that B- cinema score comes into play, and maybe it's not going to have quite the legs that one would hope for it to have with respect to, if you're rooting for it in the MCU. But it still had a massive opening weekend, and I think, are we going to attribute, the not having that much longevity in the theaters, are we going to attribute that to the fact that Red Hulk was spoiled in the marketing? I don't think so. I really don't think you can point to that as the reason, because again, I do feel like the majority, a good portion, a large portion of the general audience is like your friends. Like, they knew that a Cat movie was coming out, but did they really know about Red Hulk? Were they really aware of it? I don't know. And it's tough for me to say that they were totally aware of it, or that keeping it a secret would have been like this massive, like, oh my goodness, right? Like, yes, we were robbed of that surprise. We didn't get that surprise yet. We can talk about Hulk and Thor Ragnarok. We can talk about Doomsday being revealed in the last trailer for BVS. Yes, definitely all of that. But by the same token, like, I think that these studios, look, I can go all the way back to the fact that the Burly Brawl, there's a massive move in the Burly Brawl in The Matrix Reloaded where he does this spin move and kicks like 100 of them, spinning around a pole. Like, that was in the trailer. And I remember my one buddy was like, that shouldn't have been in the trailer. That could have been awesome to see first and foremost in the movie theater. And I get it. I totally understand it, but I also don't know that it has that big of an impact. I think from the studio's perspective, it doesn't have that big of an impact on the bottom line. So while we as fans are lamenting the lack of a surprise for us, and I totally understand that, because it would have been a fantastic surprise, and I would have loved that as well, to like build it myself in my own head. Business wise, I get why they made the move, and I get why they weren't that worried about it, and why they were trying to use it as a draw for everybody else to see the film. So, and I still think it largely worked for them in that opening weekend. We'll see how further it works in the next weekends to come in that regard, to be honest with you. But so far, I would not say that this movie has been a failure by any stretch. Certainly not. If you want to call it a failure by the lofty expectations that have been placed upon the MCU previously, I suppose you could, but we're not in that same path lane. We're not in that same world anymore. Like, things have changed massively, and people need to recognize that. Fandoms and fan bases certainly need to recognize that as well in that regard. But as always, Alex, thank you very much for the feedback. Greatly appreciated. Like I said, I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the survivors and the rest as we get into season 3. I want to see if you believe you see a shift in the storytelling and how things are going from what you just experienced with the first 2 seasons of TNG. Indeed, good sir. And finally, we'll end this week's episode of Flight Chat with a pair of emails from Jared Cardos. This first one is titled Fantastic Flightcast. Oh, wonder what he's going to talk about here. He says, "Hey Ray, hope you're doing well. With this email, I wanted to say some thoughts from the latest Flight Chat episode, then some thoughts on the newest Marvel trailers." From John's email, he says, "I will say that one of the Legion of Super Pets is in the comic Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, aside from Crypto." All right. With Anthony's email, he says, "And some of the political stuff, I agree with your talking about surviving and wanting to expand and want to expand on it with a quote I saw on Blue Sky by James Tynion and the Fourth. Endure, persevere, survive, help your people, get a little tougher and meaner, but don't let it poison your heart." End quote. That's a fantastic quote. I love that. Endure, persevere, survive, help your people, get a little tougher and meaner, but don't let it poison your heart. That's fantastic. I love that. Thank you for that, Jared. That's outstanding. James Tynion and the Fourth. That reminds me, I've got to reread and finish Detective Comics Rebirth, because I was really enjoying that way back when, during the Rebirth era. Jared says, "I was going to talk about it in my What I've Been Watching segment, but since Wally, you mentioned Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man in his email, and the Peter actor Hudson Thames' whole woke thing came up, I'll talk about it here. First, on the show itself, while I'm a few episodes behind right now, he says, I've liked what I've seen so far. I admittedly had low expectations going in, partly because I feel the whole Peter Parker in high school plot is kind of played out at this point, especially in animation. To put it in perspective, the last time that any animated series had Peter past high school was Spider-Man the New Animated Series over 20 years ago. All that being said, while Peter in high school is kind of rote at this point, the show has been doing some interesting stuff outside of that, like having him interact with different characters in new ways, and the ways he gets his powers is different and intriguing, without going into spoilers. All right, fair enough. Good assessment of the show. He says, as for the woke quote from the actor who plays Peter, what's funny about him worrying about it is that ironically Friendly Neighborhood might be the most diverse and woke Spider-Man animated series. It includes supporting characters that are very diverse in race, sexual orientation, and dynamics, and perhaps most prominently race-swapped Norman and Harry Osborn to be black characters. Really? The Osborns are black? Maybe I knew that and I forgot. That may have come up before. He says, surprisingly, I haven't heard a lot of people complain about that as much as one usually does. My assumption, or maybe my hope, is that when Thames talked about worrying that the show would be woke, he meant it in a more desperate, inauthentic, corporate kind of way that can happen at times that this show has so far been avoiding. Yeah, you hope that, but who knows? Fingers crossed that that's what he meant, if that is in fact what he meant by that. He says, as for my email, what I was saying that you didn't talk about the number of comic book movies in 2023 when talking about The Flash, I was more talking about that episode. Apologies if it sounded otherwise. Okay, I honestly don't remember what it was, but no worries. No worries at all, man. And thanks for the recommendation for Section 31, he says. I think I got to about 4 or 5 episodes of Discovery, but I'll go back and finish up. Probably when I finish one of the shows that I'm watching at the moment. All right, good deal, fair enough. Also, when I was talking about the logo with the recent Superman teaser and TV spot, he says, I meant a movie logo that says Superman, something sort of like these. And he sent me an image. And this is an old image. This is an image of Captain America Civil War, Thor Ragnarok, Inhumans, Avengers Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2, Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange. What he's getting at is a Superman logo that actually says Superman, right? Like it has the word Superman over top of it. You know, like how we see the words Man of Steel over the Superman logo, or, the Flash over the Flash logo, something like that. Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, we don't have a logo yet that says Superman. Now that I know what you're talking about, Jared, I suspect we will. I don't know when that'll happen, probably during the full trailer, but I suspect we will get a trailer or an image, a logo that actually says Superman and not just the logo. We'll see, though. I mean, he may want to go all elemental with it, but I suspect we at some point the marketers will be like, no, we have to actually put the name Superman in it. You got to put the word in there. So we'll see. But continuing on, he says, now to what will probably be the big geek news of the week. And mind you, he sent this email on February 18th. The launch of the new Fantastic Four trailer, which was really cool. The whole retro 60s vibe and design really helps set it apart from other movies in the MCU. Yep, we've all pretty much agreed on that. The thing already looks good, and I'm sure they'll make the CGI look even better by the time it comes out. It was also funny that they cast a guy famous for his role in The Bear and then show him for the first time cooking something that had to be intentional. Thank you for bringing that up, Jared. Nobody's brought that up. How come no one has brought it? That tells me how many people are or aren't watching The Bear or don't know that Ebon Moss-Bachrach is from The Bear. Yeah, that was cool. And I haven't watched The Bear, but I at least know the premise of the show to know, yes, it's about chefs and it's about cooking. And yes, he's cooking in the trailer. Of course it was intentional. Yes. They did that on purpose. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely. And that was cool. I did like that little meta reference, if you will, for fans of The Bear. That was totally done for marketing purposes. He says, I'm also really glad to see Galactus in all his big purple dude in crazy hat glory. I did find it odd at first that Reed didn't show off his stretchy powers, but I assume they're just making the effects look good, as Reed's stretchy powers can be uncanny if not done right. Either way, not a bad little first look, and I'm definitely excited to see it in July. Yeah, I feel like anybody that is truly disappointed, not saying you are, but anybody truly disappointed that they didn't see Reed's powers in this first teaser, no, you got to understand that's last on the list in that regard, right? Like they're going to show you Invisible Girl, they're going to show you Thing, they're going to show you Johnny Storm. They can do all of that invisibility, rock, and flames way better, like off the bat, than they can show like stretchy powers, like Stretch Armstrong limb powers in that regard. So yeah, I'm not surprised whatsoever that we're gonna have to wait to see Reed's powers manifested later on with respect to the marketing for this. No doubt about it. I'm not surprised at all. Let them perfect it. Let them refine it, because they're gonna analyze it and scrutinize it heavily the first time we see it. No doubt. He says, finally, there was the Thunderbolts trailer that aired during the Super Bowl, which I thought was a decent one, he says. There's a good amount of cast interaction that was fun. One could say it's derivative of stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy and Suicide Squad, but looks like they could be executed well. The trailer does kind of confirm a lot of the rumors that have been going around about the antagonist, but still leaving just enough mystery as to what is going on with him. Glad I still don't know. I'm still in the dark on that one. That's good. There is a benefit to not being as connected to social media as maybe others are in that regard, for spoilers. He says also this trailer is interesting with the talk I've seen recently about the end of the actor being the big sell, where the movie advertises the cast not by their real names, but by their character names. That said, I think this movie is a weird one to do this with. Like, I think the next Avengers movie can do this by advertising, Captain America, Hulk, Thor, etc., but I feel like Florence Pugh and David Harbour are better names to sell the movie on than Yelena and Red Guardian. I don't know about that. Like, if I'm going to the general audience, are Florence Pugh and David Harbour really household names with the general audience? I don't think so. I think they are with us and with fans. Again, this is talking about that 95 to 5%, that 90 to 10%, right? Like, I think we know those names. I mean, especially since we know David Harbour from Stranger Things. We know him from Suicide Squad. We know him from, the first Equalizer movie, The Newsroom. We know David Harbour from so many different things. Hellboy, of course. Is the general audience really going to know his name? Or are they just going to say that guy? I feel like they're largely going to say that guy. And if any of them saw Black Widow, they're going to know him as, oh, that guy from Black Widow, Red Guardian, right? And same with Florence Pugh. She's Nat's sister. She's Yelena, right? She is Black Widow's sister. That I feel I could just hear the general audience saying that. That's Black Widow's sister and their dad, right? That's how they're going to go. So I'm going to agree to disagree with you on that one. I don't think that those two are strong enough names to like throw them out there for the general audience to be like, oh, we know we're going for David Harbour and Florence Pugh. No, I think that, and truthfully, if we were going that route, to be honest with you, Jared, I would think that the biggest name out of this cast to throw at the general audience would be Julia Louis-Dreyfus. But even then, they're probably just going to know her as Elaine from Seinfeld, to be honest with you, right? That's just my own thought. That's just how I think about it. That's how I look at it, truthfully, to be honest with you. Even Sebastian Stan, for people who know what his name is, and I don't know, I feel like a lot of the general audience is just going to look at him as either the Winter Soldier or the dude that just played Trump in a movie, something like that. I don't think the general audience is as beholden to household names like that anymore, unless it's like Tom Cruise or Meryl Streep or a name that has been hyped over the last several decades. I don't think Florence Pugh and David Harbour are strong enough to do that. I really don't. Not for the general audience, just in my humble opinion. Jared also says, the poster they released with the trailer is funny. Guardian finally got his wish. They're on the Wheaties box. And yeah, this is a really good mock-up of all of the Thunderbolts on a Wheaties box. And it just says Thunderbolts with the asterisk. Everyone deserves a second shot. Marvel Studios. All the characters are listed as the ingredients, only in theaters on May 2nd. No, this is a cool poster. I like this poster. If I really like the movie, this is a poster that I would absolutely want in that regard. No doubt about it. But that was it for Jared's first email. His second email that he sent in is called Brave New Flightcast, and these are his thoughts on Captain America Brave New World. And he just sent this just hours ago as of me recording this particular episode. He said, first, I wanted to give my thoughts on Brave New World, which I liked for the most part, though there are definitely detractions that put it more in that mid-tier for me. There's some great direction from Julius Ona and music by Laura Cartman. There's some really strong performances, including the likes of Carl Lumbly as Isaiah, Tim Blake Nelson as the leader, or Samuel Stern, since the movie didn't have the stones to call him that. Yeah, Marvel has always been kind of iffy on code names in that regard. DC has not. That's one thing that you can say about DC. They lean into code names harder than the MCU does in that regard. There's no doubt about that. And Giancarlo Esposito as Sidewinder. I didn't even know his name was Sidewinder, to be honest with you. I will say that while I was one of those that was initially a little bummed that Esposito wasn't given a bigger role in the MCU, he says, but I loved how he kind of encapsulated the more campy yet dangerous B to C level supervillain lieutenant we see in comics, and I certainly wouldn't mind him being snarky and superior to other MCU heroes in other movies. Finally, Anthony Mackie and Harrison Ford do some great performances as Sam and Ross, but I feel like a lot of that is them doing some work on scripts that weren't really serving them. All right. He says Sam doesn't get much of an arc, and what he does get kind of feels like a rehash of what he had in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Meanwhile, Ross is having this antagonist to redemption arc, and I don't know if the movie really does enough to earn it. Oh, there's an interesting phrase, earning. Like, sure, Ross misses his daughter, and he's trying to seemingly do good as president, but the stuff he does to Stearns, and especially the fact that he was willing to let Isaiah be executed to keep his secrets, doesn't do enough to earn that redemption. I think that dynamic between Sam and Ross are one of the big parts of why the movie doesn't have as much personal or political stakes as The Winter Soldier or The Falcon and The Winter Soldier. I'm going to address the whole earning thing here in a second, Jared. But let's continue on. You said, and actually, speaking of The Winter Soldier, Bucky is a congressman now? Seriously, look, I'm sure helping to save the universe from Thanos looks great on campaign commercials, but I would think a former brainwashed Soviet assassin would be a hard sell for the average American voter. I don't know, man. Post-blip? Maybe people are in a really different mindset. That's how I look at that. Like, because all the Winter Soldier stuff, the brainwashing happened before the blip occurred. I feel like maybe the blip, threw everybody off. Understandably so in that regard. We'll see. And quite honestly, if we look at current real life American politics, is it really that unrealistic to think that a former brainwashed Soviet assassin would be an easy sell for the average American voter? I don't know. Jared might want to rethink that. Bucky might get elected president in the real world, to be honest with you. But I digress. He says, but all of that aside, while I feel there's a chord that's a bit underwritten, I think the cast and crew put in some work to make it at the very least an entertaining movie. Like I said, I would still put it in that mid tier of MCU flicks. I just hope that future Cap movies will have a little bit more meat and bite to them. All right, so let's see. You're going to go into what I thought, my review of the film afterwards. So before getting into that, let me just address what you were saying in terms of the whole earning thing. Because I really think that the whole the whole arc with Ross, the redemption arc, I feel like that's designed for those of us that followed the character from The Incredible Hulk. And I brought this up in the review. This is pretty much an Incredible Hulk sequel. And the idea is, in that movie, you're supposed to see that Ross isn't all bad. I mean, you feel whatever kind of way about him when he brings up the Sokovia Accords and whatnot, right? But you're still supposed to see, like, okay, there is still a human inside that general's mind in that regard, right? So the redemption arc really starts there, right? So it's part of the homework problem, unfortunately, where it requires you to go all the way back to Incredible Hulk and remember how he started then and carry that over here, and also to do it through two actors because William Hurt sadly passed, right, in that regard. So it's a bit of a stretch, for recalling the memories. That's why, like, I've told people, it's like, listen, if there's anything that you would want to watch before seeing Brave New World, it might just be Incredible Hulk and maybe The Falcon and the Winter Soldier in that regard. Because I hear you about Sam not having much of an arc, but the redemption arc, I really think that's what it's incumbent upon. Is you got to go all the way back to Incredible Hulk and think of Ross all the way through to now for that arc to be quote unquote earned. And I really hesitate using the word earned because I feel like a lot of people use that in a pretentious sense. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying, like, I'm not big on using that particular word. That's all I will say in that regard with respect to my thoughts on it. Nothing against you using it in that regard. But here, let's see what you had to say about my review. Because you did have thoughts about my review episode for the movie that I posted a week or so ago. You said, regarding the post-credit scene, I guess I can see some comparisons to BVS in terms of what the scene is, but it's also generic enough that it could just be a scene of an antagonist telling the protagonist that there are worse things to come. That said, this does feel like one of the weaker post-credit scenes in a while. I mean, I have calculated the probabilities to realize that there are parallel universes, you and most theoretical physicists, Stearns, and this would be even less surprising for a denizen of the Marvel Universe since, as Sam said himself, most of their problems come from androids, aliens, and wizards. Are alternate universes that much beyond the pale? In fact, now that I think about it, wasn't the whole thing in Avengers Endgame that their whole time heist might create parallel universes? So yeah, not the best post-credit scene they've ever done. No, they've certainly done far better post-credit sequences, but I would chalk this up to not only all the post-production and delay madness with the strikes and whatnot for this movie, but also the still relative uncertainty of where they're going with the multiverse saga in the wake of scrapping Kang and everything going on with Jonathan Majors. I think there's still a good amount of organizational uncertainty for the rest of the multiverse saga, which is why it's more of a generic tease. But if somebody watches it and gets BVS vibes, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I'm not. Others, like Brent and others, could, because I know that there have been times before where people have suggested that there are shots in the MCU that evoke BVS, and he's very much against that, as many others are. And listen, that's your business. It's all subjective. You can feel whatever way you want. I'm not going to tell somebody that they're wrong for picking up a subjective connection in that regard. You can disagree with them all you like. They're not wrong for feeling that way. So that's what I would say about the person that made that connection with that scene and the end scene of BVS with Batman questioning Luthor in prison at the very end. Continuing, Jared says, as for the adamantium tease, I agree it doesn't do much other than tease the X-Men, but when you think about it, it does kind of complicate things. While the idea of the metal coming from Eternals is an interesting way to bring it in, that does mean that almost nothing from the X-Men can really be a thing yet. Just discovering adamantium means that there's no Weapon X project. No Weapon X project means no Wolverine, and he's usually running around for a while before being roped into the X-Men. So unless they decide to change a good amount of things for the MCU version, it feels like the X-Men would have to be like 10 years down the line at least. Yeah, that is something that definitely concerns me, Jared. Here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that their discovery of adamantium is similar to their previous belief that there was only a certain amount of vibranium in the world. Remember, up until Black Panther, they believed that there was a very finite amount of vibranium and that most of it was in Cap's shield. And then you find out, oh no, there's an entire mountain of it in Wakanda that you're not even aware of because you believe that these black people were just a third world country this entire time, right? I'm hoping that adamantium has been discovered beforehand and Ross and the world governments just weren't aware of it until now, and that this is just them, their eyes being opened to its existence. Because otherwise, yeah, we are going to be waiting a tick for an X-Men movie, and I don't want to wait that long. I do not want to wait 10 years down the road for a flippin' X-Men movie. That needs to get going. They're teasing it too much, right? Between the stuff I mentioned, the post credit scene and the Marvels, and now this, it's like, no, you can't keep bringing up the X-Men and just wait another 10 years before you do something with it. So that's what I'm hoping, is that along the lines of vibranium, that you know this is just them publicly finding out about adamantium, and that adamantium has kind of always been there. I'm perfectly okay with that, and I feel that the general audience really won't give a shit if that is how they decide to do that for their canon in this regard. So here's hoping. Fingers crossed on that. Continuing, Jared says, as for episode 195, I also find myself in a weird position that around a decade ago, I would find myself being more critical of the MCU than most people, but now I find myself defending it more. And it's not because the movies and shows have all become notably better, he says. They're still all right to solid on average, with the occasional subjective stinker along the way. I think there's a few reasons, but I think it just got so big and popular that it became an easy punching bag in general and for the state of Hollywood at the moment. The funny thing about the people saying that they want a reboot of the MCU, I think it's actually possible. Without going into spoilers, the story that Secret Wars is based on gives them the ability to do so. I think something like that will have stuff like melding the Fantastic Four world and X-Men into the MCU is definitely in the cards. And yes, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness did call the MCU World 616, but there was already a universe destination for it in the comics as Earth 199999, and it was actually name dropped in Across the Spider-Verse when Miguel talks about the damage that Doctor Strange and the nerd from Earth 199999 did in No Way Home. I can get why they would at least want to use a shorter number in the movies. That Earth number can be hard to type, let alone say, but there's also a feeling of there's already 1616. It's funny, I remember reading before that Aman Vellani has argued with Kevin Feige about using 616 as a signifier for the MCU, which further endeared me to her and goes to show that she is the best actress to play the role of the nerd that is Ms. Marvel. But that's more than enough. Sorry this came in a little late, and looking forward to your next episodes. Technically, I guess it was a little late, Jared, but no, you definitely made it in under the gun for sure for me recording this particular episode. Yeah, the whole Earth thing, I don't know. If I was more of a comic nerd and Marvel nerd like you and others are, I would probably have some stronger thoughts on that. But yeah, the 616 thing, I mean, I've heard people reference 616 before, so yeah, that is a little different. As far as what you're saying with respect to the idea of, whatever happens in Secret Wars, allowing them to meld the Fantastic Four world and X-Men into the MCU, listen, I'm all for that. I'm all for that because I feel like the Avengers has run its course through the Infinity Saga, and the idea of constantly coming back to them and constantly trying to bring back the old feel that reeks of movie executives trying to get back to yesteryear. And it's like, no, you need to go in a different direction with respect to the future of the MCU. And maybe it could be considered a reboot, but it really isn't. It's really a continuation because the Avengers have had their time. The Avengers are moving on, and now you're going to give way to the Fantastic Four and to the X-Men, and they can be your superhero team-up groups for the next 16 to 17 years, right? You can do that, right? You did it this far with the MCU and the Avengers. You can go forward with that if you want to, and you don't necessarily have to completely reboot and disconnect from this universe in that regard. So, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting fight, if it even is a fight between the creatives, and Feige and the studio execs who, probably are saying we just want to get back to our $1 and $2 billion films, and you would do well to bring back Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth and everybody else so that we can get back to earning the money that we used to earn instead of saying, hey, listen, as much as a copycat industry as Hollywood is, the audience is looking for something fresh and new, and we can totally hook them in on something fresh and new if we go in that direction, because we have more than enough on our roster to be able to do so, especially now that we have Fantastic Four and X-Men at our disposal. And oh, don't forget about Spider-Man, who is our biggest money earner by himself by far, and it's not even close in that regard. So yeah, there you have it. Maybe not. Maybe in the MCU, Iron Man and the others have earned more money, but Spider-Man globally, as far as a Marvel character, is the top earner. He is the god tier Marvel character globally for generations. Okay, that is not an argument, and he's definitely like their top character, if you will, in terms of prestige historically throughout movies and comics for Marvel, no doubt about it. So, at any rate, thank you as always for your feedback, Jared. Greatly appreciate the insight and the opinions, especially when it comes to all of the comic connections and whatnot with respect to this. We have a lot to talk about and look forward to. And as always, I look forward to your feedback every episode of this show, good sir. Thank you as always. And that will do it for this episode of Flight Chat. A little bit longer because we had an extra week tossed in there, but we're still going to try to do the every other week thing, provided that, I don't have to work OT on a Sunday again. But thank you so much for everybody who sent in emails. Thank you for all of your feedback. Thank you again to John, to our newcomer, Amr, who's been listening to the show for a long time. Please do let me know if I'm pronouncing your name right or not, and let me know if we're all good on that, good sir. But thank you for contributing to the feedback circle. Looking forward to more of your emails. Thank you to Wally, thank you to Stu, and thank you to Alex and Jared as well for your feedback. Greatly appreciated. If you have things that you want to contribute to the feedback circle, if you want to talk about any of the Marvel, DC, Star Trek stuff that we've been talking about on this show or anything else coming up, you know where to find me on Blue Sky at FlightCast, and there's the FlightCast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.